The victims have been identified as 18-year-old Peter Zito Jr. of Beaverton and 16-year-old Donald Barton of Aloha. Their bodies were discovered about 3:45 this morning near the Oak Hills Recreation Center.
He's just a happy kid, and it was terrible when I heard that he was gone.
The sun wasn't out yet on October 4th, 1974, when a newspaper delivery driver was on his way to work. He had no idea that he was about to witness the scene that would make the next day's headlines that would read, "Two boys shot dead in a suburb of Portland." When he reached the parking lot of Oak Hills Rec Center, he happened to stumble upon the bodies of two teenage boys with multiple gunshot wounds to the head, covered in their own blood. The investigators searched for the person responsible for the killings, but despite their efforts, the culprit evaded justice for almost 50 years until he was finally caught. So, who were these boys? And why were they targeted? Welcome to M7 Crime Storytime, where we shed light on solved, unsolved, and twisted cases from across the world. Portland, Oregon, with a population of around 905,000 residents, was an area of contrasts in the 1970s, where smut and corruption mingled with dance crazes and social change. In the 19th century, it rapidly evolved from a rough-and-tumble port town into one of the most dangerous port cities of the West Coast. Its waterfront was as notorious as it was bustling. Portland held on to its working-class roots amidst the growing cosmopolitanism of the West Coast. Physically, the city appeared to be falling apart. Even in the face of urban decay, as night fell, the city's discotheques came alive with the beats of disco music. Discomania was born and soon became a billion-dollar industry. Booze-fueled key parties were all the rage, while bitter divorces played out like soap operas. This was the world in which two teenagers, 18-year-old Peter Zito Jr. and 16-year-old Donald Barton, were growing up. Born in 1956 to Peter and Faith Zito, Peter Zito Jr. was a gentle boy. At 18 years old, he loved his pet cats the most. The only thing that came close to his cats was his 1956 Oldsmobile. He'd been an Aloha High School student where he was on the football team, but recently he dropped out of school and was working as a dishwasher. Even so, he aspired to get his diploma from Portland Community College. Peter was friends with a 16-year-old boy named Donald Barton, who was born May 2, 1958. He was very close to his mother, Irene Barton. He was also a student of Aloha High School and played hockey for his school team. He'd previously worked night shifts at the recreational center and was also a part-time employee at the bustling Black Angus restaurant. Not much information is publicly available about Donald's personal life. However, these two young boys would soon become household names. Back on October 4th, 1974, just before dawn, an Oregonian newspaper delivery driver began his morning route. Little did he know that something unimaginable was waiting for him, something that would become the talk of the town and make the front page of the newspaper that he'd carry the next day. As he drove along his route, he eventually arrived at the Oak Hills Recreational Center's parking lot. There, in the dim light of dawn, he noticed a parked car, a 1956 Oldsmobile, that seemed out of place. But then he noticed the two lifeless bodies next to it.
The date is 10/3/74.
Detectives made this film of the crime scene at the Oak Hills Recreation Center. Peter's body was next to his car.
At the driver's side door.
He was shot in the front of the head. His 16-year-old friend, Donald Barton, was slumped inside the engine compartment where he'd been trying to fix the car. He was shot in the back of the head. The footage was discovered by Detective Robert Rookhausen.
The fact that two teenagers, shot in the head there, just blew everyone away.
When the detectives reached the location, they discovered the lifeless body of a teenage boy, later identified as Peter Zito Jr., lying beside the car's driver's side door.
He's just a happy kid, and It was terrible when I heard that he was gone.
As they peered under the car's open hood, another distressing sight awaited them. Donald Barton, who appeared to have been working on the car's engine, was discovered slumped over.
The victims have been identified as 18-year-old Peter Zito Jr. of Beaverton and 16-year-old Donald Barton of Aloha. Their bodies were discovered about 3:45 this morning near the Oak Hills Recreation Center.
Both the teens were shot execution style, and not just once. Multiple bullet wounds were found about their heads. The forensic report suggested they were shot using a .22 caliber gun. It was challenging to draw definitive conclusions about the motive or circumstances surrounding the crime, but it seemed like a targeted attack. The only major theory that stood out at the time was that the young men had gotten into a personal dispute with someone who couldn't let go of the grudge and ultimately killed both Peter and David. Working on this theory, the detectives soon found a crucial clue. Within just 12 hours, they discovered that an 18-year-old Lincoln High School student named Joseph Amir Wilson had been involved in a fight with another man the night before at the recreational center. Some detectives believed that Joseph wanted to get back at the man who'd beaten him, along with that man's brother. Joseph's intentions were nothing short of killing the two men. So, in his rage, he went out to seek revenge, but encountered Peter and Donald instead. Mistaking them for the other two men he was looking for, he ended up killing the two teenage boys. The theory was plausible and circumstantial evidence checked out. So, without wasting any time, the detectives arrested, charged, and later indicted Joseph Wilson for these crimes. Following his arrest, his hands were checked for trace metal detection analysis and were also subjected to a neutron activation test to determine whether he'd recently fired a weapon. It was about to be the most solid proof to highlight his guilt. But the real shocker was yet to come. Both the tests came back negative. Despite that, the detectives ended up charging him for the murders based on circumstantial evidence. Even though Joseph was charged with the crime, something didn't sit right with the detectives. First of all, there is no solid proof that he'd killed Peter and Donald. Secondly, he constantly denied any involvement in the crime. Some detectives believed him, but others were of the mindset that every criminal says they're not guilty, and found this case no different. Even so, Detective Jim Welsh was sure that Joseph Wilson was not the killer. He was still on the lookout for the real culprit. So when a teenage boy was arrested in December 1974 for theft, Detective Welsh was on high alert. The theft case and the double murder did not seem related, but a connection would eventually emerge. When a sheriff's deputy, Jim Spinden, searched the boy's car, a .22 caliber handgun was found illegally concealed. The boy was 17-year-old Stephen Paul Chris. In a city like Portland, chance encounters were not that unusual, but such connections can be troubling when the matter at hand concerns a double murder. So when Chris turned out to be Donald's colleague at the Black Angus restaurant in Hillsborough, some eyebrows were raised. Detectives discovered that they did not get along well. In fact, Chris had been upset with Donald that day. However, it wasn't a solid reason to arrest him for the double murders. The building's suspicions seemed to be clouding rational judgment. To settle the matter, a ballistics test was carried out and the result came out to be negative. The gun was returned to Chris. Even though detectives had let Chris go, they felt that they had some circumstantial evidence against him, so they began looking into Joseph's possible involvement in the case once again. Without any murder weapon or DNA, there was no way to figure out what was the truth. The case had already been full of twists and turns that kept everyone on the edge of their seat. So ultimately, Joseph was subjected to 2 lie detector tests. The stakes were high, so the results were examined by 5 independent polygraph operators. After thoroughly going through the tests, the conclusion was filed, but it wasn't what the detectives had been hoping for. All the reports said that he'd cleared the test. Finally, they seemed to realize that they had to move on when there were no substantial leads or clues that could prove him guilty in a court of law. So in early 1975, the detectives released Joseph from the prison after he spent 4 months there, but he was not off the suspect list just yet. After his release, he went back to Aloha High School to finish his senior year. Now, the question remained, who killed Donald and Peter? For years, there'd be no answers to this question. The case slowly grew cold. On the first anniversary of the crime in October 1975, the families of Peter and Donald came forward to show appreciation for the investigators' efforts. Donald's mother, Irene Barton, said, "We don't feel bitter about the fact that no one's been caught." She, however, did highlight the fact that it felt unfair that they didn't know who'd done this to her boy. But being bitter hurt even more, especially when they seemed so far away from finding out what happened to her son, Donald. Faith Zito, Peter's mother, also believed that the investigators were doing a fine job and justice would be done. She also said, "I don't know what form it will take, but God will be the judge." Unfortunately, after a year, the case was at a standstill. The only update in the case was related to a former suspect, Chris. In 1976, he went to the Fort Lewis United States Air Base in Washington. He had a job there taking care of animals as a vet. On October 8, 1976, almost 2 years after he was suspected of a double murder, he got into a fight with his boss, Sergeant Jacob Kim Brown. Sergeant Brown told Chris he needed to pay for fixing his car because Chris had damaged it. But either he didn't have the money or just didn't want to pay for the repairs. So instead, Chris decided to kill the man. In a fit of rage, he shot Sergeant Brown in the head 5 times with the same gun that was checked in Peter and Donald's case. He was arrested and charged without any ballistic testing because Chris had already confessed to the crime. The judge subsequently sentenced him to 35 years in jail, but in 1988, after just 12 years, Chris was released on parole. 48 years later, in 2022, the sheriffs in Washington County, one of whom was Detective Mark Pavolny, decided to take another look at the double murder case. Looking at the file of Jim Welsh, the detective who suspected Chris from the start, the cold case detectives found vital evidence. They wanted to retest the gun that Chris used to kill Brown. This time, in February 2022, the test showed that it was, in fact, the same gun used in the case of the 2 boys, Peter and Donald. In the 70s, ballistics testing generally meant that an expert was going to use a microscope to compare a test fire from the suspected gun to a slug retrieved from the crime scene. It could easily account for human error and could not have been foolproof. The gun match became the oldest known match nationwide that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives had ever been able to confirm. As a result, Stephen Paul Chris, who had been living in Iowa all these years, was taken into custody using the same pair of handcuffs used when deputies arrested him in December 1974.
While reviewing the case file, we decided to take a second look at the ballistic testing, since it had been done nearly 50 years ago. Detective Shannon Wild is my partner on this case, and she has helped extensively, particularly with the ballistics. She submitted ballistic evidence to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, more commonly known as the ATF. That same day, an ATF supervisor notified Detective Wild there was a presumptive match, showing the gun Steve Chris used to murder Sergeant Brown was in fact the same gun he used to murder Donnie Barton and Pete Zito Jr. The next step was to confirm that presumptive match, which was done at the Oregon State Police Crime Lab. Lab technicians also confirmed the gun Steve possessed in December 1974 when he was stopped by Deputy Spindon, and then used in the October 1976 murder, was also used to murder Don and Pete.
Detective Welsh, who'd passed away more than a decade ago, helped catch the real culprit through his well-documented case files. After his arrest, the now 65-year-old Chris was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. The motive was not yet revealed to the public, and the investigation is still ongoing. They're looking into the possibility that Chris was responsible for more homicides. Therefore, they're seeking information from the public about Chris's life after he was released from prison. Sheriff Pat Garrett extended formal apologies to Joseph Wilson's relatives for the wrongful arrest nearly 50 years earlier. Joseph had, by then, become a self-employed landscaper and a member of the First United Methodist Church. In 2000, he died of a heart attack at the age of 43. The sheriff's office asked for help from the local residents to identify or locate any surviving family members of Joseph to make a personal and direct apology. Peter Zito's sister, Barbara Zito, said,
It's a difficult thing to deal with, to have to accept that, your brother can be murdered this way and there is nobody accountable for it.
Donald's and Peter's families suffered for almost 50 years without knowing what happened to their boys or who murdered them. Even though Chris is now behind bars, it provides little comfort to the parents who were robbed of all those years with their sons. Why do you think Joseph was arrested despite some evidence suggesting his innocence, but Chris was let go even though he had a possible murder weapon? Do you think the investigators weren't careful enough when they initially inspected his gun? Although nothing can bring Donald and Peter back, the family can now trace a relief in the fact that the killer of their sons is no longer living a free life and can't hurt anyone else. Justice was finally served.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
I've been shot in the leg. Oh, my leg is filled with blood. Oh, Jesus.
The assailant still nearby?
I don't think so. They took off running.
Do you know what she looked like at all?
No, she was behind me.
When 35-year-old Dave Krupa found himself single after a decade-long relationship, he decided to give online dating a try. Dave was looking to have some fun, nothing serious. He'd made several new female companions, but none captivated him like Cari Farver did. Intelligent, beautiful, and charming, 37-year-old Cari was also just looking to have fun. But when their short-lived romance came to an abrupt end, Dave wasn't prepared for the craziness that would follow. For the next 3 years, Dave would come to understand the proverb, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." But what had made the charming Cari flip? And what shocking secrets lay behind the harassment that Dave faced? With a population of 486,000, Omaha is the largest city in the state of Nebraska and the seat of Douglas County. Situated along the Missouri River, Omaha's rural setting and gorgeous landscapes give it a wholesome feel. But don't be fooled by the city's laid-back nature, because it's also home to one of the top zoos in the world. The Henry Doorly Zoo and Aquarium is known for its unique exhibits and innovative conservation methods. A city this big can't be free of crime, and Omaha's crime rate is often ranked above the national average. Despite this, Omaha is considered a charming and affordable place to live and raise a family. This is where, in 2012, Dave Krupa became tangled in a web of lies and fear when he decided to start dating again. Born in 1976 in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Dave Krupa was considered the quintessential nice guy. He was the eldest of 3 boys and was raised in a Southern Baptist family. Growing up, Dave played American football, but his dreams were dashed following an injury in his freshman year in high school. He eventually dropped out of sports altogether. After graduating from school, he joined the United States National Guard, where he served for 2 years before receiving a discharge from the service. Dave then enrolled in college and studied toward an associate degree in automotive engineering. He then began working in Council Bluffs, Iowa. In the year 2000, Dave met Amy Flora in Iowa. The two moved in together and started a family of their own. Their daughter Castillo was born in 2001, followed by a son, Trey, in 2003. But over the years, Dave and Amy's relationship became strained. Money, lack of quality, and failure to commit were their biggest hurdles. So, after 12 years together, in 2012, the couple decided to separate while still co-parenting their children. Needing a change of pace, 35-year-old Dave moved to Omaha, Nebraska for his new job as manager at an automotive repair shop. He also started using online dating sites to meet women. Dave was upfront with his dates. He wasn't looking for anything serious. One of these women he met was Shanna Elizabeth Goliar, or Liz, and she was a 37-year-old mother of 2. Dave and Liz had intense chemistry and found many things in common with each other. But after 6 months of on and off dating, Dave felt claustrophobic in the relationship. He asked Liz for some space. And just as that relationship was ending, Dave would meet a woman who he believed ticked all the right boxes, 37-year-old Cari Farver. In mid-October 2012, Dave was at work and he crossed paths with Cari Farver. She needed some repair work done on her black 2008 Ford Explorer. Dave was the one to help her.
6 months after I met Liz, I'm at the counter managing the shop, and I'm the person greeting customers when they come in, and an extremely attractive woman walks in the door.
Nothing came of the encounter, but he was immediately taken by her. 2 weeks later, he came across Cari's profile on the dating app Plenty of Fish.
When we looked at each other, there was a little spark. You know, we both smiled. You know, you feel that sometimes.
After a flurry of flirtatious text exchanges, the two agreed to meet for dinner at an Applebee's in Omaha on November 3rd, 2012. After dinner, they returned to Dave's apartment. Cari and Dave both agreed they just wanted to have some fun with each other.
So Cari and I ended up going to Applebee's for our first date. We hit it off. As we're getting up to leave, I asked Cari if she wanted to come over and hang out. And she said yeah.
However, their night was disrupted by Liz, who was demanding to be let into the apartment to collect her belongings. Cari told Dave to come over to her house after he sorted things out with Liz. Both women shared a brief glance at each other as they passed in the hallway. At around 9:30 p.m. that night, Dave made his way to Cari's house. After that night, the two began a casual and exclusive relationship. Cari Lee Farver was born on November 30th, 1974, to Nancy and Danny Farver. She had an older brother named Adam. When Cari was just 18 months old, her parents divorced. However, they remained on good terms with each other even after the separation. In 1981, Cari's mother Nancy married her high school sweetheart. Mark was a great stepfather to Cari and Adam, and the entire family relocated to Macedonia in Iowa. Early in her life, it was clear that Cari had an adventurous and independent spirit. She was also very intelligent and excelled in academics.
You noticed Cari when she walked into her room. She had a laugh, she had a smile. You were drawn to her.
As she grew older, Cari developed a slight rebellious streak like most teenagers do. Cari and Nancy had their fair share of arguments over the years, but they still remained close. After graduating high school, Cari went off to study at a Kansas college where she met and fell in love with a man named Frank. Cari soon discovered she was pregnant, and while she and Frank tried hard to make it work, they eventually went their separate ways. Concerned about being a cash-strapped single mother, Cari enrolled for a 6-month computer course, which her grandparents helped pay for. A few weeks after completing the course, she gave birth to her son, Maxwell. Soon after that, Cari was offered a programming job that paid well enough to support her son and herself. Over the next few years, Cari married twice and divorced twice. She briefly moved to Topeka, Kansas, but missed her family. She suffered long periods of depression and mental illness. Cari was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder and started medication to deal with the illness.
I think she was a little overwhelmed just being on her own in her late 20s. She started developing depression.
In 2012, Cari moved back to Macedonia, Iowa to be closer to her family and raise her 14-year-old son. She also decided against starting a serious relationship, opting to focus on herself and her son Maxwell. However, after meeting Dave, something seemed to have shifted in Cari. Over the next 2 weeks, Dave and Cari started dating exclusively, but remained casual. They met frequently for dinner and spent several nights together at each other's homes. During this time, Cari was given a major project to oversee at her workplace in Omaha. The extra hours at work and the long commute from her home in Macedonia would leave Cari without any spare time to spend with Dave. It was then that Dave had a brilliant idea. His apartment in Omaha was just a 20-minute drive from Cari's workplace. The two of them had grown extremely comfortable with each other, which prompted Dave to ask Cari to stay at his apartment until her project at work was complete. Cari was grateful for the offer. She arranged for her son Maxwell to stay with her parents in Macedonia while she moved in temporarily with Dave. On the evening of November 12, 2012, Cari drove to Dave's apartment and set herself up in his place. The two of them spent the evening together before getting ready for bed. On the morning of November 13, 2012, Cari woke up early to start work. She was sitting on the couch in the living room, still in her pajamas and typing away at her laptop as Dave showered and made a pot of coffee. At around 6:20 a.m., Dave left for work. He kissed Cari goodbye and promised to see her that evening. Unbeknownst to Dave, his life was about to change unexpectedly in the next few hours. Shortly after 10 a.m., Dave received an odd text from Cari. Cari was suggesting that the two of them move in together permanently. Dave was confused at her sudden change of heart when they had already mutually decided to keep their relationship casual. Not wanting to hurt Cari's feelings, Dave politely declined the offer and reminded her of their agreement.
She texts me and says, let's move in together, which was very left field because we had already talked about that not happening. As soon as I can, I text her back and say, I'm not interested, I can't do that, we haven't known each other nearly long enough for that.
Within seconds, Cari responded with a cutting text, telling Dave that she never wanted to see him again and that he'd ruined her life. Dave was surprised by her angry outburst, as just that morning they were smiling and making plans for the evening. It seemed Cari had spiraled out of control in a matter of hours. Dave decided not to think too much about it, believing he may have dodged a bullet with Cari after all. Meanwhile, Cari's colleagues and supervisor were growing concerned as she didn't report to work that day. Cari had called her supervisor earlier that morning and agreed to go into the office to verify the work she'd done. But by mid-morning, Cari still hadn't showed up. It was unusual for Cari to just disappear, as she was responsible and reliable. Her supervisor tried to call Cari throughout the day, but it only went to voicemail. She left several messages, but there was no response. That evening, when Dave returned to his apartment, there was no sign of Cari or her car. He was still recovering from the abrupt end to their short-lived relationship. He felt disappointed by Cari's behavior. She'd seemed so positive and independent that he believed they could have worked well together. But it seemed he didn't know who she really was after all. For Dave, it seemed as if Cari had blown in and out of his life like a wild storm. For 2 days, he heard nothing from her. But this was only the calm before the storm. Then his phone began beeping with several disturbing texts from Cari. In the texts, she accused him of being a horrible person and blamed him repeatedly for ruining her life. Dave received hundreds of harassing text messages and emails from Cari. She threatened him and even mentioned his ex-girlfriend Liz Gollier.
I would regularly receive 60 plus texts a day, 100 emails a day. It was not uncommon.
Dave found the situation bizarre. Why was Cari berating Liz when they didn't even know each other? At the same time, in Macedonia, Iowa, Cari's mother Nancy and son Maxwell also received several text messages from her. Cari told them she was quitting her job in Omaha and taking up a new offer in Kansas. Many of Cari's friends also received similar texts.
I started getting text messages that said that she was taking a job in Kansas, which totally threw me.
Maxwell told Nancy that Cari had once mentioned a potential job in Kansas and might have opted to make the move. Still unsure, Nancy decided to give Cari the benefit of the doubt, hoping that with time and space, her daughter would return home. Back in Omaha, the situation with the relentless text attacks on Dave was about to escalate. On November 23, 2012, Dave's ex-girlfriend, Liz Gollier, was driving back home when she noticed a vulgar message spray-painted on her garage wall. She immediately contacted Dave and told him that she too had been receiving threatening texts from Cari. Liz then called the Omaha Police Department to file a report of harassment against Cari Farver. These threats against Dave and Liz eventually led them to getting back together, as they now shared a common enemy. But they still didn't understand what had pushed Cari over the edge. When Cari failed to show up for her half-brother John's wedding on November 16, 2012, Nancy decided to report her missing to the Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office. Nancy told officers about the text messages and revealed that Cari suffered from bipolar disorder. Allegedly, police didn't take Nancy's pleas seriously. As time passed, Cari missed several important events that included Thanksgiving, Maxwell's 15th birthday, and her father Danny's funeral. By then, Nancy knew something was terribly wrong. Cari loved her family immensely and wouldn't have missed these important events at any cost. Meanwhile, in Omaha, Cari's stalking had reached another level. Dave was receiving messages from Cari about exactly what he was wearing or doing at any given time. Whenever Dave and Liz were together, their phones would blow up with several text messages from Cari threatening violence against the pair. After months of harassment, there was finally a small breakthrough. In January 2013, Dave was returning from work late at night when he spotted a familiar vehicle in the parking lot of his complex. He took a picture of the number plate and sent it to the Omaha Police Department. The police confirmed it was Cari's Ford Explorer. The vehicle was impounded and checked, but no physical evidence linked to Cari was found in the car. The only item was a fresh mint container that had a fingerprint. The print was sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and run through the National Fingerprint Database, but there was no match. Based on this new development in Omaha, investigators back in Iowa started to take Nancy's concerns seriously. 5 months after Cari disappeared, Nancy got her first ray of hope. She received a call from a man at the Sienna Francis House Emergency Shelter in Omaha who told her that Cari was there with him.
I get the call from a gentleman that says that Cari is at the Sienna Francis homeless shelter and that she wants you to come pick her up. My heart just started. I was shaking, and I thought, oh my God, we're gonna bring her home. She's gonna be okay.
Nancy, together with investigators, raced to the shelter. However, it was a hoax and caused Nancy even more grief. 15-year-old Maxwell tried to reach out to his mother on Facebook. Miraculously, Cari replied asking him how he was doing. But when Maxwell asked her to answer 3 personal questions about him to prove that it was really her, she got angry and stopped responding. Nancy started receiving nasty text messages from Cari, accusing Nancy of being a horrible mother. These texts were crude and often contained misspelled words. This made Nancy increasingly skeptical. She knew her daughter was always careful about using correct spellings and phrases in her messages. In Omaha, things were starting to heat up. The terror Cari had brought upon Dave and Liz took a toll on their relationship, and they eventually split up. But this didn't stop Cari from continuing to harass the pair. In one message to Dave, she said she was going to kill Liz and sent him a picture of a woman tied up in the trunk of a car. Dave then called Liz, who confirmed she was all right. But things didn't stop there.
I get an email, and it's a picture of what looks like Liz tied up in the trunk of a car. And it says, I have Liz tied up in the trunk of the car, and you need to call her right now and tell her you hate her. She's a whore, otherwise I'm going to kill her.
On August 16, 2013, Liz's house was set on fire. Fortunately, she and her children were living elsewhere at the time, but their 2 pet dogs, a cat and a snake, were killed in the inferno.
I get a call from Liz, frantic, freaking out. My house is on fire. Somebody's burned my house down. So I go over to Liz's house, and there's fire trucks all up and down the street, and there's firemen walking around, and there's hoses, and they're pouring water into place.
And Liz told an officer she knew who did it.
The guy that I'm seeing, he has a girlfriend that he dated for 2 weeks, and she's been stalking me since November.
Do you know her name?
It's Cari, C-A-R-I.
Dave had started to grow paranoid. He bought himself a 9mm Smith & Wesson pistol for protection, but Cari kept coming after Dave. Soon after the fire at Liz's house, an auto shop where Dave worked was vandalized, and in the following months, Cari's threats grew more and more dangerous. In January 2014, Dave invited an old high school friend named Heather Twett to his apartment to spend the night. But the couple were terrorized all night long by Cari, who sent Dave several nasty messages. At one point, they heard the handle on the front door being jiggled violently before a large brick was thrown through the bathroom window. Even more concerning, Cari was starting to threaten Dave's ex-girlfriend, Amy Flora, and their kids too. Nearly 2 years after she breezed through his life and vanished, Cari kept crazily pushing the boundaries. She seemed determined to go after anyone Dave had been in contact with. By spring of 2015, more than 2 years had passed, and investigators were nowhere close to finding Cari Farver. The case had become popular among the officers at the Potawatomi County Sheriff's Office in Iowa. It caught the attention of detectives Ryan Avis and Jim Doty, who volunteered to take over the case.
We'd heard about the case. It was kind of water cooler talk around the office. It intrigued us because it was a single mom who was very into her kid and family, and it just didn't make sense to us that she just vanished.
The detectives planned to investigate the case from 2 angles, one where Cari was missing, and the other where Cari was possibly dead. Avis and Doty started with the original case files. Doty found it strange that Cari had not accessed any of her checking accounts since her disappearance. It was impossible that she was living without any money all these years. Another intriguing discovery was that Cari only communicated through text, email, and social media messages, never phone calls. From what they'd read about Cari, she seemed like a person who was devoted to her family, so these behaviors were rather odd. Avis and Doty picked up another strange recurring detail in the original case files. Liz Golier featured prominently in the documents as a victim of harassment, but they couldn't understand why Cari would target a woman she barely knew. Both Dave and Liz had allowed investigators to download the contents of their phones back in 2013 during the initial investigation regarding the harassment. Avis and Doty teamed up with Anthony Cava, a tech specialist within the police department, to go through the downloads from 2013. It was then that Cava stumbled upon evidence that put Liz in the spotlight of the investigation. Deleted files were recovered from Liz's phone contents. Among these files were images of Cari's car from before Cari was first reported missing by her family. Investigators also found between 20 and 30 fake email accounts linked to Liz's phone. Added to that, Cava found an app that allowed the phone user to schedule times for when messages would be sent to another person. The digital evidence was shocking, but it still wasn't enough to charge Liz with anything. Detectives needed to find Cari's car, which had been sold a few years earlier. After tracking down and procuring the vehicle, the team decided to treat it like a crime scene. Accordingly, forensic analysts examined every inch of the vehicle. When they stripped away the car seat covers, they found blood soaked into the cushions of the front passenger seat. The blood was determined to be human, and after further testing, was found to match Cari's DNA. The fingerprint that had been recovered from the original investigation 2 years ago was tested against the fingerprints of Liz Gollier. It proved to be a positive match, another important addition to the physical evidence linked to Cari's disappearance.
Looking at Liz's phone download, we had the picture of Cari's vehicle. We had the *67 phone calls that Liz had placed to Cari's home phone number.
And there's one more piece of evidence, that mystery fingerprint left in Cari's car. But so far, police can't find a match in their database.
One of the things we did when we took the case is we had that fingerprint compared to Liz's fingerprints, and it was a match.
Avis and Doty found yet another clue that pointed towards Liz knowing much more than she was telling them. Nancy showed police an image of a bank check from the person who'd bought all of Cari's furniture after she allegedly relocated to Kansas. The check was signed by Shanna Liz Gollier. Investigators questioned people that knew Liz and discovered troubling secrets from her past. Liz had once harassed her ex-boyfriend and his new wife and had stalked the couple until they eventually divorced. Clearly, this was not the first time Liz had grown obsessed over a man. As investigators started to put together the puzzle of Cari Farver's disappearance, Liz came forward with another shocking revelation. She told investigators that she believed Dave's ex-girlfriend, Amy Flora, had killed Liz, stolen her identity, and had been the one harassing them these past 3 years.
Amy Flora is Dave Krupa's ex-girlfriend and also the mother of his children. All these years, Liz thought she had been harassed by Cari, but now she thought maybe it was actually Amy this whole time pretending to be Cari, and that would make more sense, right?
They only dated for 2 weeks, and I don't understand why a person would still be stalking him almost 3 years later. It's getting ridiculous. She keeps stalking me on Facebook.
So Amy still would like to be with Dave?
I'm guessing. I don't know.
Okay.
By then, investigators knew that Liz was clutching at straws to save herself. They needed a plan for Liz to implicate herself. In a surprising twist, the Iowa Police Department received a 911 call from Liz at 6:30 p.m. on December 5, 2015. Liz reported that she'd been shot in the leg by a woman while walking alone at Big Lake Park. Investigators from the Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene and saw Liz with a gunshot wound in her left thigh.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
I've been shot in the leg. Oh, my leg is filled with blood. Oh, Jesus.
The assailant still nearby?
I don't think so. They took off running.
Do you know what she looked like at all?
No, she's behind me.
Liz insisted that Amy Flora, Dave's ex-girlfriend, had shot her. But while Liz recovered from her injuries, investigators were able to clear Amy from the investigation entirely. Firstly, officers examined Amy's car and found that the engine was cold, meaning she hadn't used it that evening. Secondly, Amy's neighbor told officers that they'd seen her with her children around the apartment complex during the time of Liz's shooting. The police were also notified that Dave had reported his gun stolen. Investigators determined that Liz had stolen Dave's gun and shot herself to mislead the investigation. Almost immediately, in the days that followed, Liz started fabricating emails from Amy that stated she was the one who shot Liz at Big Lake Park. Another email described in detail how Amy had stabbed Cari 3 to 4 times before stuffing her body in a garbage bag. Investigators were aware that Liz was the person fabricating the emails from Amy. They were just manipulating Liz into providing the physical evidence they needed. But the most vital evidence came from a memory card that belonged to Liz and was found in Dave's tablet.
There were selfies that Liz had taken. I mean, there was everything that you would normally have on your cell phone. But then I came to a photo that no one had seen before. It was reddish, and I wasn't sure what I was looking at first, but it turned out to be a human foot. A human foot with a tattoo.
Among the deleted files that the team could recover was one distressing image. This was a photo of a human foot that showed signs of decomposition. On the foot was a tattoo, later confirmed to match a tattoo that Cari had gotten years earlier. Liz was brought in for questioning and presented with the evidence. These included the photos from her phone, the IP address traced back to her house, and the fabricated confession emails from Amy. Liz denied any knowledge of these. However, a search of Liz's house provided more physical evidence, including a digital camera and camcorder belonging to Cari. On the camcorder was a video recorded by Cari just 2 days before she disappeared. On December 22, 2016, Shanna Liz Gollier was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Her defense attorney, James Martin Davis, requested that she be given a bench trial in which the judge would be allowed to make the final decision. Davis argued that the entire case was based on circumstantial evidence and there was no proof of a body to charge Liz with murder.
You're gonna not hear a single eyewitness saying, yeah, we saw her kill her. We saw her stab her. Not a single eyewitness even saw my client with the victim in this case.
However, Douglas County District Attorney Brenda Beadle argued that Liz was a diabolical woman who had not only killed Cari Farver, but continued to harass everyone that knew her.
This is a bizarre and twisted case of a fatal attraction. It's about an obsessive woman that would stop at nothing to get what she wanted.
At the trial, the prosecution presented uncontested evidence that proved that Liz saw Cari as a romantic rival for Dave's affections. They also showed that she'd become unhinged by Dave's rejection and had impersonated Cari for years in order to grow closer to him through shared traumatic experiences. Liz's obsession was so dangerous that she'd set her own house on fire and killed her pets, and also shot herself in the leg while blaming Cari and Amy. In 2017, Judge Timothy Burns found Liz guilty of first-degree murder and arson. He sentenced her to life in prison at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women. This case was undoubtedly one of the most perplexing cases ever investigated by the Omaha Police Department. For Dave Krupa, it remains a waking nightmare. He's spoken out about being naive to the fact that Liz was such a sinister individual. To this day, Cari's body has not been found. Dave said on numerous occasions that Cari's mother, Nancy, and son Maxwell are the real victims of this crime. Nancy and Maxwell have continued to march forward with their lives, even though Cari's death has left a major void that can't be filled. Maxwell has continued in his mother's footsteps, pursuing a degree in software engineering and data sciences at Iowa State University. On November 3, 2006, Wake County police officers responded to a 911 call made by Meredith Fisher just after 1:30 p.m.
I need an ambulance. It's an emergency.
What address are you at, ma'am?
Birchleaf, 5108 Birchleaf Road. Oh my God.
Problem, tell me exactly what happened.
I think my sister's dead.
Okay, tell me what happened, ma'am.
I have no idea. Oh my God.
What's your name?
Meredith Fisher.
Meredith.
Oh my God.
Meredith, listen to me, please.
Yeah.
Are you with the patient now?
Yes, I'm her daughter.
Okay. How old is the patient?
And there's blood everywhere. She's 28, 29.
You said there's blood everywhere?
Yes.
All right, is she conscious?
No, I don't think so. Should I try to help her?
Listen to me, ma'am.
I'm listening.
Is she breathing?
I don't think so.
Have you checked?
Michelle, she's cold.
Okay.
There's like blood footprints all over the house.
Okay, listen
my daughter,
to me.
like her daughter's little footprints. Yeah, there's blood all over the
Okay, did you say she's cold?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, stay on the phone.
Oh my God. Michelle.
Let's see if you can get her on her back.
I really think she's dead. There's blood in the bed.
I'm gonna get the sheriff's department to pick up on the line with us.
Okay.
Because they're going to need to talk to you about what you're seeing, okay?
By the time police and paramedics arrived at the house in Raleigh, it was too late to save the 5-month pregnant victim, 29-year-old Michelle Young. The mystery behind Michelle's murder would puzzle investigators for another 3 years, until intense scrutiny of the clues at the crime scene would finally bring her killer to justice. Why was Michelle murdered? And what clues led to the conviction of her killer? The city of Raleigh in North Carolina is named after Sir Walter Raleigh, the English explorer who established the now lost Roanoke colony, which was the first English settlement in North America. Raleigh is the state capital as well as the seat of Wake County in North Carolina. Nicknamed the City of Oaks for the sheer number of majestic oak trees that line its streets, Raleigh's 476,000 residents enjoy blending the beauty of nature with suburban living. Although prone to tornadoes, Raleigh's rated as one of the safest places in the country when it comes to crime. It's also well known for its elite academic institutions, which form part of the famed Research Triangle. And it was this chance to study in a top-tier university that inspired the ambitious Michelle Young to move to Raleigh and make a life for herself. Michelle Marie Fisher Young was born on February 17, 1977, to Linda and Alan Fisher. She was raised in Sayville, New York, along with her younger sister Meredith. Growing up, Michelle was known for being cheerful and charming. She attended Sayville High School in New York and was the co-captain of the cheerleading squad. Apart from being a talented athlete, Michelle was also a hardworking student. She aspired to become a tax lawyer. After graduating in 1995, she applied to study finance at North Carolina State University. In 1996, she made the move from Sayville, New York to Raleigh, North Carolina. During her freshman year at the university, she joined the cheerleading squad, but quit the team to focus on her studies. Michelle went on to pursue her master's degree and landed a job at an accounting firm in Raleigh. At 23 years old, Michelle was already successful and independent. She was the kind of person who had her priorities in order. The only thing missing from her life was the right partner, and this too would soon change. In February 2001, Michelle was out celebrating her upcoming 24th birthday when she met 26-year-old Jason Young. Like a scene from a romantic movie, Jason accidentally knocked over Michelle's drink when he turned around to get something at the bar. After buying her another drink, Michelle and Jason started to talk. They soon discovered they had a lot in common. Both Michelle and Jason were graduates of North Carolina State University and avid fans of the NC State Wolfpack football team. Jason was a North Carolina native who lived with his mother and stepfather in the city of Brevard and worked as a salesman for Black & Decker. Friends would say that Jason always had an eye for beautiful women, but that changed when he met Michelle. Their relationship started to blossom quickly, and after a few short months, the couple moved in together in Raleigh. They'd been living together for 2 years when, in July 2003, Michelle found out she was expecting their first child. Their relationship was still new, but with a baby on the way, both Michelle and Jason knew it was time to take a more serious step forward. On August 12, 2003, Jason and Michelle wed in a courthouse ceremony in Raleigh. 2 months later, on October 10, 2003, they married in a traditional ceremony surrounded by family. On March 29, 2004, Michelle gave birth to a baby girl whom they named Cassidy. Determined to give their daughter a well-balanced upbringing, Michelle and Jason moved from the city to an upper-middle-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Raleigh. Around the same time, Michelle's younger sister Meredith also moved to Raleigh, and both the sisters were overjoyed that they could spend more time together. As they settled into their family life, their careers also progressed. Michelle was hired by Progress Energy as a senior financial specialist in the tax department. Jason started a new job as a traveling sales representative at Chart One, a medical software company. The couple started making plans to expand their family of 3. In the spring of 2006, Michelle discovered she was pregnant for a second time. To celebrate the news, the couple made a trip to visit Jason's parents in Brevard. But soon, the celebration would turn to tragedy. On the morning that the couple were due to return home, Michelle and Jason took a drive to get coffee. While returning from their short trip, Jason lost control of the vehicle and drove off a 100-foot drop into a deep part of the French Broad River. Fortunately, both Michelle and Jason survived the crash, but Michelle suffered a miscarriage. The couple were able to overcome their loss, and a few months later, Michelle announced that they were expecting again. However, their dream of having a bigger family was soon going to become a waking nightmare. On the evening of November 2, 2006, Jason was preparing to leave for a business meeting scheduled for the next morning in Clintwood, Virginia. Jason wasn't keen on driving such a long distance before a stressful meeting. He decided to book a hotel in Hillsville, Virginia, a halfway point between Clintwood and Raleigh. That same evening, Michelle's close friend Shelley Shadd paid her a visit. The two women planned to have a girls' night, since Michelle would be home alone with Cassidy. Jason left home just before dinner. Michelle and Shelley shared a meal with each other after putting Cassidy to bed. They relaxed in the living room and watched Grey's Anatomy. At around 10:30 p.m., Shelley left for the night. Michelle locked up and made her way to bed. She changed into a more comfortable outfit and laid down next to Cassidy before falling asleep. Little did anyone know, Michelle would never wake up from her sleep again. On the morning of Friday, November 3, 2006, Michelle's sister, Meredith Fisher, was going about her usual routine when she received a call from Jason asking for a favor. Jason explained that he wanted to buy Michelle a late anniversary gift. He asked Meredith if she could help him by going over to their house and picking up some eBay printouts of gift ideas he'd left in his home office. He told Meredith that the gift was a surprise, so he didn't want Michelle to find the printouts. Meredith agreed to stop by in the afternoon. Meredith had already planned to visit Michelle and Cassidy that day, but decided to get there earlier so she could surprise her sister when she returned from work. It was just before 1:30 p.m. when Meredith pulled up to Michelle and Jason's house. The house was quiet, as she expected, since Michelle would still be at work. Meredith had forgotten her own set of house keys and decided to make use of the broken garage door entry, something only the closest family members knew of. The garage led off to a kitchen door that was normally left unlocked. But when Meredith entered the garage, she found Michelle's car parked inside. It was the first sign that something was wrong, because there should have been more noise if Michelle and Cassidy were home. Meredith then used the kitchen door to enter inside and immediately noticed how unusually cold the house felt. She saw Michelle's purse and car keys on the kitchen counter and called out to her sister. There was no response, but from somewhere within the house, she could hear Michelle's dog whimpering. Feeling uneasy, Meredith made her way upstairs to Michelle's bedroom. But when she pushed the door open, what she saw made her recoil in shock. Lying on the bedroom floor in a pool of blood was her sister Michelle, silent and unmoving. Meredith immediately dialed 911 for assistance. It was then that 2-year-old Cassidy emerged from under the covers of the bed and ran to her aunt.
I need an ambulance. It's an emergency.
What address are you at, ma'am? Ma'am, what's your phone number in case I lose you? Problem, tell me exactly what happened.
I think my sister's dead.
Okay, tell me what happened, ma'am.
I have no idea. Oh my God.
All right, stay on the phone with me, please. What's your name?
Meredith Fisher.
Meredith.
And this is a young address. Oh my God.
Meredith, listen to me, please.
Yeah.
Are you with the patient now?
Yes, I'm her daughter. And
Okay, how old is the patient?
And there's blood everywhere. She's 28, 29.
28.
Should I try to move her?
Listen to me, ma'am.
Yeah,
I'm going to tell you what to do,
Okay.
but you need to calm down so we can help her. You said there's blood everywhere?
Yes.
All right, is she conscious?
No, I don't think so. Should I try to help her?
Listen to me, ma'am.
I'm listening.
Is she breathing?
I don't think so.
Have you checked?
Michelle? She's cold.
Okay. Listen to me. Did you see what happened?
I don't know. Cassie, come here, sweetie. I'm here with her daughter.
Okay.
There's like blood footprints all over the house.
Okay,
With her
listen to
daughter,
me.
like her daughter's little footprints.
Okay, listen to me. What's your first name?
Meredith?
All right, Meredith.
Yes, sir.
Did you see what happened?
I just came here on a fluke. I usually, don't come here during the day.
Okay.
She shouldn't be home. She should be at work. Like,
Okay, listen to me.
yes, sir. Hey, did you know what happened to Mommy? Did she fall?
Do you think she's beyond any help?
I don't know, honestly.
You don't know? All right.
I'm normally very good under
Okay.
pressure.
We're going to tell you what to do then, okay?
Yes, sir.
Are you right by her now?
I'm keeping her daughter out of there.
Okay. All right, so you're not with her?
I'm right outside the bedroom.
All right. Can you get her daughter secured? Can you carry the phone into where she's at?
Yes.
All right. Can you secure her daughter?
Cassidy, sweetie, can you stay in your room for 2 seconds, okay? Okay. Okay. Can you close the door for 2 seconds and I'll be right back in there, okay, sweetie?
All right. Can you get her on her back?
Oh my God. No. I don't think so. She's so heavy.
Let's see if you can get her on her back.
I really think she's dead.
Pardon?
I really think she's dead.
Okay. You can't roll her over?
Not easily.
Are you going to have to try?
Hang on, I'm trying to see if I can get her pulse.
We got to try to do CPR if we can get her on her back, Meredith.
So she's like cold.
She's cold?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And her body is stiff.
Okay, then don't try. If she's cold, then this
Oh my God, I
probably nothing that she can do.
Should I not touch anything?
All right, try not to touch anything more than you did. Was anything out of place or unusual when you came in?
This place does not look like what it normally looks like.
Okay, what?
There's blood in the bed.
Okay, all right, try not to touch anything else, okay?
Okay, I just moved a pillow.
I just leave everything exactly where it is then.
Meredith checked Cassidy for injuries, but she didn't appear to have any. She only seemed confused about what had happened to Michelle. She kept asking her aunt to get Band-Aids because her mummy had boo-boos. The 911 operator began giving Meredith basic instructions on how to check for signs of life in Michelle. But with a vast amount of blood on the floor and how cold Michelle's body felt, Meredith felt certain that she was dead. Unable to check on her sister, Meredith pleaded with the operator to send emergency services to the house immediately. She then took Cassidy outside and waited at the front door until police and ambulance services arrived. Wake County Sheriff's Office deputies arrived at the scene along with paramedics shortly after Meredith exited the house with Cassidy. One team of paramedics checked on Cassidy while another team followed police officers into the house. On the first floor, everything seemed normal, just cold. As they approached the second floor landing, it became obvious that there had been a violent struggle in the house. Michelle was discovered lying face down in a pool of blood on the floor between the bed and the closet in the master bedroom. The bedroom wall behind the headboard had also been splattered with blood. Tiny footprints smeared with blood had been tracked through the master bedroom and the bathroom in a chaotic manner. These footprints led up to a stool near the bathroom sink. Police surmised that Cassidy had walked back and forth to the bathroom. Paramedics declared Michelle dead at the scene and noted that she may have been killed several hours earlier. Her body was removed and transported to the North Carolina office of the medical examiner. Crime scene investigators started to collect evidence from the house after police sealed off the residence. Next to Michelle's head on the floor was a little doll, which they believed may have been placed by Cassidy. There was also a pillow on the floor with a bloody shoe print that investigators noticed was a size 12 shoe, probably belonging to a man. Investigators also discovered that Michelle's wedding and engagement rings were missing, and 2 drawers from her jewelry box had been taken. A walkthrough of the house revealed interesting clues. There is no sign of forced entry, but investigators did find a slight amount of blood smeared on the kitchen door handle from the inside. After questioning Meredith about who else knew of the broken garage door and unlocked kitchen entry, officers learned that the information was only known to family and close friends of the couple. This led investigators to believe that whomever killed Michelle had known her well. The news of Michelle's death spread quickly through the neighborhood, and soon family and friends began arriving at the crime scene. Meredith told investigators that she'd come to the house at Jason's request to collect some printouts about a surprise gift before Michelle could find them. She also informed officers that she'd called her mother Linda and told her about Michelle's death. While investigators were questioning Meredith, Michelle's friend Shelley arrived at the crime scene after hearing the news. When questioned, Shelley explained that she was the last person to see Michelle alive the night before. She told officers that she'd arrived at Michelle's house around 6:30 p.m. the previous evening. Jason had left shortly afterwards, and both women had sat down to eat dinner together. Shelley told officers that while spending the evening with Michelle, she had an eerie feeling as if someone was watching the house. Michelle had told her that both she and Jason had lately been hearing strange sounds outside their home at night. Shelley had felt so uneasy that she'd asked Michelle to walk her out to her car when she left at 10:30 p.m. Investigators who performed a sweep of the house noticed that 2-year-old Cassidy appeared to be rather clean, despite having walked through the blood near Michelle's body. When they asked Meredith if she'd cleaned Cassidy up before police arrived at the scene, she said that she hadn't. Meredith told police another intriguing detail. Cassidy was dressed only in her pink pajamas without a diaper. Meredith found this strange because Michelle would always put her daughter to bed with a diaper, and it was impossible that Cassidy would be able to change herself. Investigators were putting together the information they received from both Meredith and Shelley and the clues from the crime scene. First, the neighborhood that Michelle and Jason lived in was fairly safe, so investigators didn't believe that Michelle's murder was a random occurrence. Second, whomever had gained entry into the house knew how the garage door entryway worked. And third, it was obvious someone had cleaned Cassidy up after Michelle's murder, someone whom Cassidy was familiar with. Suspicion naturally fell on Jason, Michelle's husband, since the spouse was always the first suspect in such cases. Just as investigators put together the circumstantial evidence, Jason arrived at the house with his mother, Pat Young, and stepfather, Gerald McIntyre. If at that point their suspicion about Jason had been stoked, the next revelation would add more kindling to the growing fire. Jason had already contacted a lawyer before returning home. Investigators were unable to question Jason regarding his wife's murder since his lawyer had advised him to remain silent. Instead, they told Jason he could present himself for questioning when he was ready. They did, however, take his vehicle, his luggage, and the luggage of both his parents into evidence after presenting him with a search warrant. Jason also complied and provided DNA samples and his fingerprints for analysis. Investigators were also able to obtain Jason's cell phone records to track his movements. Michelle's autopsy was performed by Dr. Thomas Clark, who ruled that her death was caused by blunt force trauma. Michelle had been struck nearly 30 times, which led to her suffering a brain hemorrhage, a skull fracture, a broken jaw, and several dislodged teeth. Dr. Clark noted that she'd also been strangled, and the nail marks found on her neck were her own as she tried to fend off her attacker. Over the next few weeks, the investigation continued as Michelle's devastated family laid her to rest in Wake Memorial Park. As Jason was the primary person of interest, crime scene investigators began by analyzing his DNA and fingerprints against the evidence found in the house. However, they came up empty-handed. No physical evidence found in the house could connect Jason to being directly involved with the crime. The shoe prints found on the pillow did match a pair of shoes owned by Jason, size 12 hush puppies, but when tested, there were no traces of blood on the pair he provided. Investigators had also seized the computer from Jason's home office, which revealed some disturbing internet searches. Some searches for purses and bags on eBay had been made on the night of November 2, 2006. This was followed by inquiries for directions between Raleigh and Clintwood on MapQuest and several email logins made by Jason. Searches had also been made for anatomy of a knockout, head trauma blackout, head blow knockout, and head trauma at some undetermined time. Jason's SUV was also searched for traces of blood and DNA, but nothing was found. What they did find were several receipts from gas stations and the Hampton Inn in Hillsville, Virginia. Investigators used this information to retrace Jason's movements during the time of Michelle's murder. From speaking to Shelley, investigators knew that Jason had left home sometime after 7:15 p.m. on the evening before Michelle's murder. He then stopped to fill gas at a gas station in Raleigh and then made a call to his mother, Pat Young. At 9:25 p.m., he stopped at a Cracker Barrel in Greensboro for dinner. After leaving Greensboro, he drove to the Hampton Inn in Hillsville, Virginia, and checked into the hotel at 10:54 p.m. Jason used his key card at 10:56 p.m., after which there was no further activity on the card, proving that he'd been in his room the entire night. Investigators visited the Hampton Inn in Hillsville, Virginia. After speaking with hotel staff, investigators discovered that Jason had made use of the express checkout service provided. That meant none of the hotel staff would know exactly what time Jason checked out. His whereabouts that entire night remained unknown. Only a phone call made by Jason to his mother at 7:40 a.m. the next morning placed him in Virginia at that time. Thereafter, Jason had arrived at his scheduled meeting in Clintwood at 10:30 a.m. Investigators requested a copy of the surveillance video, only to discover several oddities with the video. It showed Jason checking in and going into his room a little before 11 p.m. However, from around 11:20 p.m. to 5:50 a.m., the camera had been switched off. The investigators contacted the hotel once more and spoke to Keith Hicks, who was the night supervisor on the day Jason checked in. Hicks provided them with some interesting details. While doing his rounds on the morning of November 3, 2006, Hicks noticed the emergency door leading out of the hotel had been propped open by a small rock. He believed someone had intentionally left the door propped open to avoid using the front entrance and the key card to enter the hotel. Hicks had then checked the surveillance footage to see who'd done this and noticed that the camera was not recording since 11:20 p.m. the night before. After asking a maintenance worker to sort out the problem, Hicks himself went to check on the camera at around 6:30 a.m. that morning. It was then that he found the camera pointing toward the ceiling. Keith explained to investigators that the cameras at the hotel hadn't been touched in years. These strange events caught the interest of investigators, as it was too much of a coincidence that the camera was moved and unplugged the very same night Jason Young checked into the hotel while his wife had been killed back in Raleigh. Investigators decided to track Jason's payments made at all the gas stations along his route. The transactions were compared to the mileage on Jason's SUV, and everything added up. However, investigators were not ready to give up. They interviewed several employees from gas stations along Jason's route until an employee named Gracie Calhoun narrated a curious event. Gracie worked the night shift at Four Brothers BP in King, North Carolina. Investigators noted that this particular gas station was located along the most direct route between Raleigh and Hillsville and was the only one open 24 hours. Gracie told officers that a man had driven up to the pump in the early morning hours of November 3, 2006 and tried to fill gas. When unable to perform the transaction at the pump, he'd come to the cashier window. According to Gracie, she explained to the man that they could not allow anyone to fill gas without producing identification and a credit card between the hours of 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. Upon hearing this, he allegedly cursed at her before throwing a $20 bill on the counter and returning to the gas pump. After filling gas worth $15, he drove off without returning to collect his change. When investigators showed Gracie a photo of Jason, she instantly identified him as the man who'd filled gas that morning. Investigators checked cash register transactions at the gas station and found a transaction for gas valued at $15 filled between 5 a.m. and 5:40 a.m. on November 3, 2006. This extra gas purchase meant that Jason had covered more miles in his trip than investigators initially believed. Investigators found themselves hitting a brick wall with the case. There wasn't any physical evidence that placed Jason at the crime scene. The circumstantial evidence was also a leap, given the distances between the Hampton Inn in Hillsville and the Youngs' residence in Raleigh. Investigators returned to questioning the family, this time focusing on any marital problems the couple may have faced. On the surface, Michelle and Jason's relationship seemed ideal. They were successful in their careers, had bought a nice house in a good neighborhood, and were expecting their second child. But interviews with friends and family painted a different picture. Michelle's sister Meredith and mother Linda told investigators that Jason had initially wanted Michelle to terminate her first pregnancy, but she refused to comply. Somehow, the couple had reached an agreement and decided to marry and start their family. After the birth of Cassidy, it seemed as if Michelle and Jason were thriving in their relationship and planned for a second child. But Michelle's family and friends revealed that the couple had often argued. Several friends, including Shelley Shad, revealed that Jason never seemed too interested in making the marriage work, but Michelle was always willing to try. Friends also remarked that Jason was still immature as compared to Michelle, and at parties attended by the couple's friends, he'd often get drunk and embarrass Michelle with his behavior. Digging deeper into Jason's personal life, investigators learned that he was not as faithful to his wife as many would have believed. They found proof that Jason had been having an affair with a woman named Michelle Money since September 2006. Money was mutual friends with Michelle and Jason, having attended North Carolina State University just like the couple. She'd been experiencing her own marital problems and had likely turned to Jason for comfort. Despite all the clues pointing to Jason, police could not charge him yet. They would need to build a solid case against him. Over the course of 3 years following Michelle's murder, investigators with the Wake County Sheriff's Office and prosecutors from the Wake County Attorney General's Office worked to develop a watertight case based purely on circumstantial evidence. The evidence was presented to a grand jury in 2009, and on December 14th of the same year, Jason Young was indicted on charges of first-degree murder for the death of Michelle. He was arrested at his mother's house in Brevard, North Carolina. His first trial began on May 31, 2011, at the Wake County Superior Court. It was a difficult trial as prosecutors tried their best to present the circumstantial evidence they'd collected to the jury. Despite their long hours and hard work in scrutinizing every clue, it was declared a mistrial on June 27, 2011. But investigators were not willing to throw in the towel yet. They returned to court, this time armed with more witnesses. The second trial began on January 17, 2012. Witnesses included Keith Hicks, the night supervisor at Hampton Inn, who testified about the tampered CCTV camera and emergency door being propped open.
Someone had come in, I'm assuming it's whoever unplugged the camera, and seen that the camera was unplugged and did not want to be seen, and they took their hand and they shoved it up into the ceiling.
Gracie Calhoun, the gas station employee, testified that Jason was the man who'd purchased gas on the morning of November 3, 2006. Michelle Money, the alleged mistress, testified that Jason had started the affair as he was unhappy with his marriage.
The defendant arrived on a Saturday in Orlando.
Yes.
Did you pick him up from the airport?
Yes.
And what happened during the course of that weekend?
We just spent a lot of time talking and hanging out at the house. We ended up having an intimate relationship while he was there.
And so at that point, were you actually engaged in an affair with the defendant?
Yes, ma'am.
Wake County Detective Richard Spivey testified that one of his deputies completed the drive from Raleigh, North Carolina to Hillsville, Virginia in 2 hours and 25 minutes without traffic. Terry Tiller, a newspaper delivery person in the neighborhood of Young's residence in Raleigh, also testified. She said she'd seen the lights on at the Young's house and a light-colored SUV, similar to Jason's white Ford Explorer, parked in the driveway between 3:30 a.m. and 4 a.m. on the morning of November 3, 2006. More testimony was given by Brooke Bass, Cassidy's daycare teacher, who told the court that Cassidy seemed quieter than usual following Michelle's death. In class, Cassidy had also played out a scene using 2 dolls, in which the doll she called the mummy doll was being attacked by the other doll.
She had the one doll and the chair in her hand, in one hand, and she had the other doll in the other hand, and she was hitting what she called the mommy doll. She also said that mommy has boo-boos all over.
On March 5, 2012, the jury found Jason Young guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
Ms. Rackness, you have reported your verdict as follows: we, the jury, by unanimous verdict, find the defendant Jason Lynn Young to be guilty of first-degree murder of Michelle Fisher Young. Is that correct? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if that was the unanimous verdict of this jury of guilty of murder in the first degree, and your individual verdict of guilty of murder in the first degree, would you indicate that, please, by raising your hand? Let the record show that all 12 jurors so indicated. The court therefore accepts the verdict and orders that it be recorded.
Jason's defense team appealed the judgment, but in April 2014, that appeal was denied. Jason's currently serving out his life sentence at the Alexander Correctional Institution in Taylorsville, North Carolina. On November 2, 2008, Linda and Meredith Fisher joined family and friends to honor Michelle at her gravesite at the Wake Memorial Park. They unveiled a newly erected headstone in memory of Michelle and her unborn son, Rylan. A memorial fund was also set up for Cassidy to help raise money for her education and living needs. Michelle's family was awarded full custody of Cassidy on February 6, 2009. Additionally, Superior Court Judge Osmond Smith awarded Linda $15.6 million in a wrongful death civil court case brought against Jason on March 16, 2009. Today's case is truly sad on many levels. Not only was Michelle's life taken away so tragically, but so too was the life of her unborn child. Cassidy was also a victim who lost her entire family that night. But the case to this day remains complicated. There are many who stand divided over the conviction of Jason Young, with some people arguing that he was not the person who murdered Michelle. Yet the uncanny coincidences that made for a strong circumstantial evidence case are hard to dismiss and raise several doubts on his claims of innocence. Taking this into account, we'd like to know your thoughts on today's case. Do you think Jason was innocent? Or was this an elaborate scheme to get away with murder?
One. My name's Diederik. I just came home from work and my wife and child are dead. My wife's in bed and my child's in his bassinet and there's a lot of blood.
Okay, now this is going to be hard, but I need you to please tell me why you think they're dead. Did you approach them?
They're not breathing and it's like blood in the neck area.
Are you with them right now?
I had to leave the room.
I understand. Alright, so the paramedics are on the way. I'm going to stay on the line with you until they get there to help you, okay?
Okay. Oh, my whole world's gone.
At 9:30 p.m. on Thursday, December 15, 2016, the Fort Worth Police Department responded to a 911 call at a residence on Cactus Flower Drive in Fort Worth, Texas. In the house, they discovered the bodies of 36-year-old Shanna Vandewege and her 3-month-old son, Diederik. The violent nature of the crime shocked the authorities, and the investigation into the murders began immediately. On the surface, it looked like a robbery gone wrong, but as investigators pulled back each layer of the crime, they came to a disturbing conclusion. It wasn't a random incident, but a carefully orchestrated scheme. But who would want to kill the young mother and her infant son? What enemies had Shanna made in Fort Worth? Fort Worth is the county seat of Tarrant County and the 5th most populous city in the state of Texas. With a population of just under 1 million, Fort Worth has become one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. Promoting themselves as the city of cowboys and culture, Fort Worth still hosts historic Western stockyards, which features the world's only cattle drive held twice a day for spectators to enjoy. Job opportunities, affordable living, and diverse culture attracts many to the city. But with a city of its size, the overall crime rate ranks among the highest nationally. In 2016, Shanna and Craig Vandewege and their infant son Diederik had come to call Fort Worth home until tragedy befell them. Shanna Danny Riddle Vandewege was born on June 4, 1980 in Walsh, Colorado, to Mark and Paula Riddle. She was the older of 2 siblings with a younger brother named Mitchell. She was affectionately nicknamed Sunshine, as she was known to be bright and bubbly. Shanna enjoyed participating in sporting activities such as volleyball, track, and baseball. Cheerful and always willing to lend a helping hand, it was no wonder that after Shanna graduated from Walsh Public School in 1998, she pursued a career in nursing. In 1999, at age 19, she participated in the Miss Baca County pageant and was crowned first attendant. She graduated from Redlands Community College in 2006 with a nursing degree. She made the move to Longmont, Colorado in 2007 and began working at St. Joseph Health as a registered nurse. She was dedicated to both work and church and always wanted to start a family. Shanna was married briefly, but the relationship didn't work as she and her ex-husband had different visions for the future. However, things changed in 2014 when she met Craig Vandewege at church. The relationship progressed quickly, and they were married on June 18, 2014. In January 2016, they received happy news. Shanna was expecting their first child. In April 2016, Craig was promoted to a management position at Costco in Fort Worth. Shanna, too, had applied for a new post and was transferred to the Texas Health Hewley Hospital. On May 3, 2016, the couple bought their first house on Cactus Flower Drive in Fort Worth. They welcomed their son, Diederik Jonas, to the world on September 5, 2016. Things seemed to be falling into place for the new family, but an unexpected twist was about to change their lives forever. It was December 15, 2016, a Thursday night around 9:30 p.m. when 35-year-old Craig Vandewege made a disturbing call to the Fort Worth Police Department emergency line.
911. My name's Craig Diederik. I just came home from work, and my wife and child are dead. My wife's in bed, and my child's in the bassinet, and there's a lot of blood.
Okay, now this is going to be hard, but I need you to please tell me why you think they're dead. Did you approach them?
They're not breathing, and it's like blood in the neck area.
Are you with them right now?
I had to leave the room.
I understand. Alright, so the paramedics are on the way. I'm going to stay on the line with you until they get there to help you, okay?
Okay. Oh, my whole world's gone.
He explained that he'd just returned from his job at Costco and discovered that his wife and 3-month-old son had been murdered in their home. He went on to tell the operator that he believed that they may have been killed by a burglar because his house had been ransacked. Within minutes of the call, emergency services arrived at the residence on Cactus Flower Drive and found Craig waiting for them outside with his head in his hands. armed officers entered the home and found cupboard drawers left open in a haphazard manner. After clearing the house and ensuring that the intruder was not in the house, they made their way to the main bedroom. There, they found 36-year-old Shanna Vandewege with a deep slash across her neck. In a bassinet, just a few feet away from the bed, lay the lifeless body of baby Diederik.
Right around 9:30 p.m., the patrol officers confirmed that we do have 2 deceased people at this scene, one being an infant and the other being an adult female.
His throat had been slashed so violently that he was almost decapitated.
It was hard for me to initially accept that somebody could do that to a 3-month-old. This is just evil. And you just don't see things like that on a regular basis.
At 9:50 p.m., the medical examiner pronounced both Shanna and Diederik deceased. Police questioned Craig about anyone who may possibly have had a grudge against him or Shanna. He couldn't think of any possible enemies. He believed it may have been a random intruder who killed his wife and son, who may have disturbed him during the robbery. The news spread quickly through the quiet neighborhood, and residents were starting to fear that they too might become targets of a crazed killer.
What kind of a person would kill a baby? You know, babies, especially I don't know,
However, investigators felt something was off about the crime from the outset. The house had been ransacked, but nothing of importance seemed to be missing. In the kitchen, cupboards and drawers had been left open haphazardly. Other items had been knocked over and left in disarray. However, Shanna's purse was found untouched on one of the kitchen counters. As per Craig's reporting of the incident, investigators looked at the back door, which Craig said he found open. Investigators found visible pry marks on the interior and exterior of the door frame, suggesting the door had been pried open. However, to the investigators' trained eyes, the scene in front of them looked as though it had been staged. In a separate room, they found the couple's pet dogs. It appeared as though the intruder knew the couple had dogs and tried to keep them out of the way during the murder. After searching the house and the yard, officers weren't able to locate the murder weapon. What they did find was a closet with several loaded rifles. It puzzled investigators as to why Shanna didn't think to use one of the weapons to defend herself and her infant son. In the bedroom, investigators also located 2 safes. Both were opened. But what puzzled them was that one of the safes was a combination lock. This could only mean that the intruder would have had to wake Shanna up in order to get the combination code to unlock that particular safe. However, it was possible that the safe had been left unlocked. Throughout the room, there were several items of value left behind. From their questioning of Craig, investigators knew that Shanna's pearl necklace, wedding ring, and a pair of diamond earrings were the only things stolen. Investigators then used a UV light to look for any blood splatter that may have been cleaned. They found a few spots under the bathroom sink in the bedroom and under the kitchen sink. Investigators surmised that the killer took time to clean themselves up, but failed to really explore the house and steal items of value. Upon further examination of the crime scene, detectives became increasingly suspicious. Shanna appeared to be sleeping when she was attacked, as there was no sign of a struggle. Shanna's blood had soaked into the pillow and mattress exactly where she lay. Another disturbing aspect was the fact that the intruder killed baby Diederik, despite the fact that he wouldn't have been able to identify him. Investigators were perplexed by the entire crime. As per procedure, they had to speak to Craig in order to clear him of any suspicion. On December 16, 2016, Craig was interviewed by detectives Ron Barron and John Galloway at the police station. During the interview, he remained cooperative and answered all their questions. He appeared to be rather calm and composed, despite the traumatic event that occurred just a day earlier. Investigators questioned Craig about the type of person Shanna was in life. He described Shanna as being quiet and sweet and couldn't understand who would want to hurt his family. However, he didn't seem to show much emotion.
Hey, Craig, I'm gonna get you to move right over there real quick. Okay. We started to interview Craig shortly after midnight. Craig, I talked to you a little earlier. I'm Detective Barron. This is my partner, Detective Galloway. I wanted him to give me some information that could help me make sense of what had happened. Who would want to do this? You can't think of anyone who would want to hurt your wife or your child?
No. She's always kind and sweet to everyone.
Okay.
She's the most honest woman in the world, heart of gold.
When asked about the day of the murders, Craig explained that he was working a late shift and started to work at 11 a.m. on Thursday. Craig told investigators that Shanna and Diederik were both asleep when he left for work.
Probably left the house a little bit late.
And he had to be at work, I believe, around 11. Your wife, she continued sleeping when you left. Is that correct? She was the baby asleep?
Yeah, the baby was sleeping too.
Okay. What time do you think you got to work?
Probably about 11:40-ish.
They then asked Craig about his relationship with Shanna. He told them that they were happy and that Shanna had just recently started learning to cook, which, in his opinion, was a good thing.
Kiss each other good morning, kiss each other good night. She's been learning how to cook a lot better lately. It's been really, really awesome.
Craig was trying to sell me on the fact that our relationship is good. There's no problems here.
We were just trying to get our monthly credit card bills down. We've both been stressed about the money.
He did admit that with the move and the newborn, they were having issues with money, but were working together to pay off their debt. Investigators then asked Craig if Shanna was insured. Craig told them that he'd taken out an insurance policy on Shanna that amounted to $130,000 and one on Diederik that amounted to $6,000.
You remember how much you retained on your wife and how much you retained on your child?
On Diederik, it was like $5,000 or $6,000. On my wife, it was like $130,000.
Before finishing the interview, investigators ran through the story with Craig once more. They asked him about what he and Shanna had done the evening before. He told them they'd spent time playing some video games and Shanna had fed and put Diederik to bed. However, one thing had changed from his previous statement. This time, he told investigators that Shanna had woken up before he left for work, told him she loved him, and kissed him goodbye.
She reminded me to get the ladder. I said, all right, I'll get the ladder so we can hang up our wedding pictures.
The first time he initially said she was asleep. And then he does in fact say that she's awake and that she actually engages him in some degree of conversation. When she said, don't forget the ladders, is there something you were going to have to buy at Costco? Or? Yeah. Sometimes people, when they're not being honest, they'll think about things they said the first time and they'll think, that didn't sound very good. Maybe I ought to fix that to this way this time.
This raised a red flag among investigators because it seemed as if Craig was trying to paint a picture of the perfect family. Investigators then asked Craig for permission to search his phone. He allowed them to take his phone, but asked how long it would take before he could get it back. They informed him it would take a few days to analyze all the relevant data. He didn't seem keen on handing over the phone, but in the end, he relented. Meanwhile, the cameras in the interrogation room continued recording, and within minutes of being left alone, Craig had fallen asleep. After a while, investigators returned to the room to wake Craig up and told him that he was allowed to go home. However, they informed him that they'd be impounding his and Shanna's vehicles to search for evidence. The murders of Shanna and Diederik became a media sensation because of the violent and senseless nature of the crime. Craig was under constant scrutiny from the public. It didn't help that the day after the murders, he was taken in for questioning. Shanna's family, though, rallied around Craig and fully supported him through the trying period. They believed people were just turning him into a scapegoat. But to investigators, the oddities at the crime scene, coupled with Craig's strange behavior, made them suspicious about his version of events. With the relevant search warrants in place, they began digging into his background. One of the first things they searched was the couple's financial records. It showed that Shanna and Craig were experiencing some significant financial issues since they moved to Fort Worth. It was at this time that investigators discovered that Craig had lied about the value of the insurance policy. The actual amount was valued at around $700,000. Not only did Craig lie about the policy, he also lied about his happy marriage. Craig's phone data showed that he'd been active on several dating apps, despite being married to Shanna. There were also texts between him and an ex-girlfriend in which Craig asked her if they could spend one last time together. He'd also mentioned to the ex-girlfriend that he intended on serving Shanna with divorce papers. Investigators also interviewed the dispatcher who'd taken the call from Craig and the first responders at the crime scene. They all remarked that Craig's overall demeanor was too calm given the fact that he'd just found his wife and son murdered in their home. They all agreed that everyone reacts differently, but Craig's expression of grief seemed forced. A search of Craig's vehicle yielded an interesting find. In the console between the driver's and front passenger seat, they found a pair of latex gloves. On one of the fingers of a glove were brownish smudges. These were tagged by investigators and sent to forensics for further testing. During the investigation period, investigators had come to learn that Craig had retained a lawyer. They found the move suspicious because they'd not even named him as a suspect in the investigation. But the case was going to take yet another strange and unexpected twist. The medical examiner's report had come in, and it confirmed that Shanna had no defensive wounds. The medical examiner also stated that there was a strong possibility that Shanna and Diederik were killed before 11 a.m. that Thursday morning, the time Craig claimed he'd started his shift at work. Investigators needed to speak with Craig's employers. On December 18, 2016, investigators visited the Costco in Fort Worth where Craig worked. While speaking with a supervisor, the detectives discovered several curious clues. One of the first things they uncovered was that Craig had arrived 45 minutes late for his shift on December 15, 2016. Oddly, he'd also parked his car near a surveillance camera, something he was not known to do. Interviews with several of Craig's co-workers revealed to investigators that he was not happily married at all. Craig was known to complain about Shanna and said derogatory things about her. He complained about her appearance, her hairstyle, and her overall sense of style. Craig had told his co-workers that Shanna could never do anything right. He told other employees that he had to drink heavily to cope with his relationship with Shanna and that he was considering medicating himself to deal with his problems. Craig painted himself as the victim in the relationship and often told his co-workers that Shanna invaded his personal space and that it frustrated him that she kept moving his things around the house. Yet investigators were about to learn some even more disturbing details. A female co-worker came forward and told investigators that Craig once told her that he had the urge to push Shanna down the stairs while she was pregnant, hoping the fall would kill her. Craig had made it sound like a joke and added that if his wife and child had died, he'd at least get a few days off from work. The most damning conversation, though, was one he had with another male employee. A few days before the murders, Craig allegedly told the man that he had a dream in which he decapitated both Shanna and his own father. Craig compared his actions in the dream to slicing through bologna with a knife. He went as far as to tell the employee that he was on medication for anxiety and that he believed the medication was causing him to hear voices. He told the same employee that the voices urged him to hurt people and found himself walking around his house one night, raising a shotgun as if preparing to shoot and kill. The interviews painted a deeply concerning picture for investigators. They needed to speak with Craig again and called him back to the police station. On December 19, 2016, Craig arrived at the police station and was interviewed by investigators. This time, his tone had changed. He refused to speak about Shanna or Diederik and stated that his attorney advised him against it. When investigators asked him if he was willing to take a polygraph test, Craig accused them of luring him into the station under false pretenses. Craig claimed that he was told he'd be getting his phone back. Instead, he ended the interview and told investigators that he'd need to speak to his attorney before talking to them.
So my employer provided me with an attorney. I'd like to speak with her before we go any further.
Okay.
You told me that day you're going to give me back my cell phone. That's the only reason I'm down here.
Yeah, and I just explained to you.
I understand what you explained, sir. However, that's not how you got me down here.
He walked out of the interrogation room, and police never heard back from Craig after the heated exchange. It seemed the case had come to a standstill. There was no hard evidence against Craig that would allow police to make an arrest. However, an unexpected twist was yet to come for investigators. On December 21, 2016, the Glenwood Springs Police Department in Colorado received a strange 911 call. The caller identified himself as a cashier at a convenience store. The cashier told officers that an unknown man approached him and asked to borrow a phone at a 7-Eleven in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. The stranger then told the cashier that he'd been on the run from the government. The cashier lent him a phone and overheard the conversation. While eavesdropping, the cashier heard the man telling someone about being involved in a murder. The man then left the store and got into a white Hyundai without number plates. Police were on high alert following the call, and half an hour later, pulled over a similar-looking car for speeding. When officers approached the car, they asked the man to provide his registration details. It turned out that the stranger from the convenience store was Craig Vandewege. He allegedly told police officers that he'd been having a tough week and that his wife and child had been murdered in Texas. Craig was arrested for driving without license plates. While he was in custody, officers interviewed Craig. He explained that he was on his way to Las Vegas to unwind from the stress of the week. In his pockets were a bottle of medication for anxiety and several unused condoms. A search of his car revealed even more disturbing discoveries. In the car, alongside various other bottles of anxiety medication, was an arsenal of weapons. These included several loaded handguns, an AR-15 style rifle, and boxes of ammunition. He was detained on the traffic violation charge and his bail was set at $1,100. Meanwhile, in Fort Worth, investigators had finally received some of the long-awaited results from the DNA testing on the gloves. The DNA on the inside of the glove matched Craig, and the blood smears were a positive match to Diederik. They had found their killer. Investigators were finally able to issue a warrant for Craig's arrest. It had been 16 hours since Craig was arrested in Colorado, and his family members had arrived to bail him out. Authorities in Texas were unaware of what happened in Colorado and were searching for Craig in and around Fort Worth. It would come down to a nail-biting end as the bailiff was set to release Craig when a notice popped up on their system. Craig was charged with capital murder in Texas for the deaths of Shanna and Diederik. His bail had been set at $1 million. He was detained in Colorado to await extradition to Texas.
A man whose wife and 3-month-old son were found with their necks slit in their Texas home was arrested Thursday, according to Fort Worth police. Authorities say Craig Vandewege was found outside his house the night he allegedly killed his family, but denied any wrongdoing. Officials say days later, police in Colorado received a call Vandewege was acting suspiciously and arrested him for speeding and no proof of insurance. According to local reports, Vandewege was in the process of bonding out of that charge when they were notified of his arrest in Texas. He's now being held on a $1 million bail and is set to appear in court Friday.
In January 2017, Craig was extradited to Fort Worth, Texas, and charged with 2 counts of capital murder. The case was met with several delays as Craig remained in custody. It was delayed even further by the onset of the pandemic in 2020. However, it gave the prosecution ample time to put together a strong argument. Investigators and prosecutors worked together to find Craig's motive for murder. From the interviews with Craig's colleagues, they knew that he was not happy in his marriage to Shanna. His phone data also revealed that he was having several affairs. Craig's financial situation was probably the greatest motivation to get rid of his family and cash in on the deaths. Investigators worked to reconstruct the events of the day in order to present a solid case during the trial. They believed that Craig had been drinking on the night of December 14, 2016, and had already decided that he was going to kill his wife and child. The next morning, he built up the courage and, as Shanna slept, he slit her throat. In order to be completely rid of his obligations, Craig then went to Diederik's bassinet and slit his throat as well. Afterwards, he cleaned himself up and started staging the house to look like a robbery had occurred. However, Craig made a few errors along the way. This included leaving the safe with a combination lock open, not removing valuable items from the house, and forgetting to dispose of the latex gloves, which turned out to be vital physical evidence in the investigation. Craig then went to work and parked his car near a surveillance camera to provide himself with an alibi. He texted Shanna throughout the day to keep up the pretense that he was unaware of what happened that morning. By the time he returned home that evening, He already knew what he was going to tell the police when he called to report finding his wife and son murdered in their home. After 5 years, Craig's trial began on October 18, 2021. The prosecution opened their case by presenting the jury with what had motivated Craig, now aged 40, to commit the murders. The defense did not give an opening statement. The prosecution provided several witnesses that testified about Craig as a person and how he truly viewed his relationship with Shanna. Audio clips and body cam footage from the crime scene were also played for the court to hear and come to their own decision. The footage of the crime scene was so graphic that Shanna's father, Mark, excused himself from the courtroom to regain his composure. When the prosecution presented the fact that Craig's guilt was obvious due to his composed manner while reporting the murders to the 911 dispatcher, the defense argued that it was mere speculation. But the prosecution team still had more evidence to present, including Craig's alleged attempt to flee Texas just a few days after the murders. After 3 weeks of witness testimonies, the jury had come to a final decision on November 4, 2021. Craig was found guilty on both counts of capital murder. He was automatically sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He remains incarcerated at the William G. McConnell Unit in B County, Texas. In the aftermath of Shanna's and Diederik's deaths, Shanna's family was robbed of a daughter, grandson, and son. When people had started to point the finger towards Craig, they stood behind him, never believing that the devoted family man harbored such dark secrets. Craig had played them all for fools, and instead of simply divorcing Shanna, he was motivated by greed to get rid of his wife and son. On the night of November 1st, 2013, what started as a drinking game for 19-year-old Renisha McBride and her friends in Dearborn Heights, Michigan, turned sour when an argument escalated and the intoxicated Renisha left in anger. Renisha's plan was to drive home and cool off, but she never made it home, leaving her friends to wonder what happened to Renisha and who was responsible for her disappearance. Dearborn Heights is located in Wayne County, Michigan. It's a city with a population of 63,000 according to the 2020 census. Dearborn Heights is a part of the Detroit metropolitan area and serves as a peaceful commuter community, which is majorly residential rather than commercial. Dearborn Heights was formed by the merger of two sections of Dearborn Township and a connecting strip from Inkster Village. Dearborn Heights residents are known for their friendly nature and hard-working spirit. Notably, Dearborn Heights boasts a lower crime rate than the U.S. average at 24.5 for violent crime and 32.2 for property crime. This makes it an appealing destination for safety-conscious individuals. This is the community that Renisha McBride and her family called home. Renisha Marie McBride was born on April 11, 1994, to Walter Simmons and Monica McBride in Michigan, USA. From her early days, it was evident that she was destined to stand out with her unique blend of qualities that made her shine brightly in the lives of those who knew her. Renisha was an outgoing and friendly young woman who effortlessly formed meaningful connections with everyone she encountered. At 5 feet 4 inches tall, Renisha may have been physically petite, but her presence was undeniably larger than life. Her warm and approachable nature made it easy for her to forge close relationships. Growing up, Renisha was nurtured in a tight-knit household where love and support were abundant. She shared her home with her mother, grandmother, and sister, creating a bond that extended beyond familial ties into a deep and unbreakable friendship. The strong foundation of family values instilled in Renisha contributed to her strong sense of loyalty and her unwavering commitment to those she held dear. Renisha was active in school. She completed her studies at Southfield High School in 2012, where she was a cheerleader. Additionally, she secured a job at Ford. One of the standout aspects of Renisha's life was her undeniable passion for automobiles. She had a keen interest in cars that set her apart from her peers. Whether it was the rumble of a powerful engine or the sleek lines of a well-designed vehicle, Renisha had an eye for appreciating the beauty and intricacies of automobiles. This passion wasn't just a fleeting interest. It was an integral part of who she was. Renisha had a close relationship with her father, and her father's deep affection for her was clear. He expressed his love by buying her gifts, which included 2 cars. One of those cars, a white Ford Taurus, became Renisha's favorite. Like most teenagers, Renisha loved partying and the drinking that comes with it. Late on the night of November 1st, 2013, Renisha's evening started off fairly normally. She visited her friend Amber Jenkins, and with her other friends, they started partying and playing drinking games. Renisha and her friend shared a half bottle of vodka and had a great time. However, the course of events shifted dramatically when an argument started between Renisha and one of her friends. The disagreement escalated, leading Renisha to leave the house and drive home. Little did she know the tragic events that were to unfold. On November 2nd, 2013, around 12:57 a.m., a 911 call reported a collision between 2 cars at the intersection of Bramall and Majestic Streets in Detroit. The caller reported that the driver involved in the collision had left the scene. Fortunately, no one was in the parked car. However, at 1:23 a.m., another call to 911 revealed a peculiar twist. The driver seemed to have circled back to the scene. The caller noted that the driver's actions seemed to indicate that they were possibly intoxicated. The caller told the police that the driver seemed very confused and didn't know where they were. The driver also couldn't give their phone number. Adding to the story, Dearborn Heights Police Sergeant Rory McMahon, who was just a few blocks away when the incident occurred and was dispatched to the scene, reported his findings. I observed a black female lying on the porch on her back with her feet directed towards the door. The police also testified that Renisha's driver's license and $56 were found in her back pants pocket at the scene. By 1:40 a.m., the Detroit police officers arrived at the scene. Yet, despite their search efforts, the driver was nowhere to be found. An ambulance arrived 10 minutes later, but the driver was still unavailable. Faced with an unoccupied accident site and unanswered questions, the emergency crews decided to clear the scene at 2:50 a.m. A tow truck eventually arrived to carry away the remnants of the collision. However, at 4:46 a.m., a different police dispatcher's voice announced a chilling development. West Outer Drive, a place not far from the initial accident scene, was now the stage for another distressing incident. The dispatcher revealed that they received a 911 call from a man who believed he'd just shot someone on his porch. The dispatcher concluded that the caller had abruptly ended the call and they were in the process of reconnecting.
Yes, I just shot somebody on my front porch with a shotgun banging on my door.
Just a minute later, at 4:47 a.m., the dispatcher's voice returned with a tone of both concern and inquiry. We've reestablished contact with the man who discharged the firearm. He asserts that he's unfamiliar with the individual involved. When the police arrived at the shooting scene, the victim was identified as 19-year-old Renisha McBride. However, the story surrounding her end was far from simple. The police noted that she'd been shot in the face. To piece the puzzle together, they started asking questions. The police began their interrogation with Theodore Paul Wafer, the 54-year-old homeowner in Dearborn Heights, who had made the initial 911 call about shooting someone on their porch.
I heard noises, and it startled me, what these noises were. These banging, prying noises. First on the side of the house, and then front of the house, back to the side of the house.
At this point, are you getting frightened? Is your heart racing? What's going on?
Yes, I have no idea what's happening. It was getting louder. I thought at any time something was coming through the door. It was getting violent.
Theodore worked in maintenance and transportation at Detroit Metro Airport and had been working there for the past 10 years. He held the highest security clearance. Theodore attended Northern Michigan University in Marquette for a year and was responsible for taking care of his 81-year-old mother. From their investigations, the police were able to figure out that the shooting occurred 3 hours after Renisha's car crashed. What Renisha was doing during those 3 hours remains uncertain. However, her family believed she might have been looking for help, possibly disoriented by the car crash and suffering from a potential head injury. From the progression of the story, the police were able to put the pieces of the puzzle together. After crashing her car on a Detroit street, Renisha McBride stumbled to Dearborn Heights. Disoriented from the crash, She knocked on a house's windows and doors for help. Tragically, Theodore Wafer, the homeowner, responded by firing a gunshot at her. He told the police he thought someone was breaking in and accidentally fired his shotgun. Renisha died on the spot. The incident happened at 4:42 in the morning. Renisha was intoxicated at the time, as confirmed by the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office. Wayne County's prosecutor's office took action on November 15, 2013. They arrested Theodore and announced their decision to prosecute him. He was charged with second-degree murder, manslaughter, and possession of a firearm during a felony. The trial commenced in June 2014. Theodore's own account to the police right after the fatal shooting of 19-year-old Renisha McBride on his Dearborn Heights porch showed that he didn't intend to shoot her. Prosecutors presented these statements during the trial in Wayne County Circuit Court. Strangely, Theodore and his attorney presented different accounts of how the events occurred. During the trial, Theodore recounted, "I opened up the door, kind of like, 'Who is this?' and the gun discharged. I didn't know there was a round in there." But the courtroom was not without its share of conflicting opinions. The prosecution's expert witnesses vehemently challenged any notion of accidental discharge.
Had Wafer looked like somebody who was out of his mind with anger that night when you watched it? He looked like a man who was confused after the fact. And a man that you heard was in fear for his life.
The prosecution's testimony painted a starkly different scene. They claimed that Theodore was a mere 3 feet away from Renisha when he fatally shot her. According to their analysis, there was no room for speculation about accidental firing. The evidence pointed squarely to an intentional act. In contrast, the defense attorneys highlighted that Theodore had no record of substance abuse or mental illness. His criminal background was limited to a few instances of driving under the influence from 2 decades earlier. They concluded that Theodore acted in self-defense, clearly contradicting what Theodore had stated earlier. Michigan is among a small group of U.S. states with what's known as a Stand Your Ground law. This law permits individuals to employ lethal force if they believe their life is at risk. This is the law the defense was drawing from. But the prosecution wasn't done. They insisted that in a valid claim of self-defense, that they or someone else is in immediate danger of serious harm or death in order to use force, none of which was the case, as Renisha was a teen and unarmed, while Theodore was armed and stronger. Nevertheless, the defense cross-examined Dearborn Heights police regarding their investigation into Renisha's death, emphasizing that their investigation appeared incomplete and inadequate, with some evidence missing. During questioning, an officer confirmed the dusting of fingerprints on the doors of Theodore's home on November 11th, which was more than a week after Renisha was shot. To get more information on how the evidence was collected, the police provided a detailed timeline of their activities, shedding light on their efforts. They shared that they took pictures of Theodore Wafer's residence on the very night of Renisha's tragic demise, and subsequently on November 7th, 2013 as well. One significant development was the retrieval of Renisha's cell phone from a car at a tow yard on November 4th, 2013. During the trial, Dearborn Heights Police Corporal Mark Parinello outlined the meticulous steps the police took. He revealed that the authorities returned to the tow yard on November 5th, 2013 to photograph the car, and followed up again 2 days later to obtain crucial blood samples. When cross-examined, Corporal Parinello acknowledged the importance of promptly collecting evidence as an incident unfolds. He acknowledged that the efficient and timely collection of evidence can prevent its loss. Defense attorney Cheryl Carpenter highlighted this perspective, emphasizing that this investigation might not have been thorough or exhaustive. During the trial, various pieces of evidence came into focus, shedding lights on the events leading up to Renisha McBride's tragic death. Defense attorney Cheryl Carpenter pointed to smudges on the side door, suggesting they were the result of someone forcefully banging on it. This claim was supported by a firearms expert hired by the defense, who suggested that the screen door might have been dislodged from its frame prior to the shooting. However, police testimony presented a conflicting view. According to their accounts, there was no clear sign of forced entry, and none of the locks on Theodore's home showed any signs of damage. Interestingly, some evidence seemed to hint that Theodore had opened the front door before he fired the fatal shot through the closed and locked screen door. Attorney Carpenter's defense strategy also revolved around portraying Renisha as intoxicated, aggressive, and injured from the car crash. A toxicology report revealed that Renisha's blood alcohol content was around 0.22%, which is nearly 3 times the legal limit of 0.08 for driving in Michigan. Shockingly, her alcohol level was also 11 times higher than the legal limit of 0.02 for minors. Additionally, the report indicated the presence of marijuana in her system. However, there's no evidence that she'd taken the marijuana on the day she was shot. One of Renisha's friends, who'd been with her that night, testified that she sounded different and expressed concern that someone might have tampered with her drink. This brought up questions about whether Renisha's behavior was a result of intoxication or something more dangerous. In a turn of events during the trial, Wayne County Assistant Medical Examiner Dr. Keelak Keisha testified during cross-examination that a brain injury can lead to increased aggression in some cases, while in others, it can cause a person to become quieter and withdrawn, leading credence to Attorney Carpenter's claim that Renisha might have been aggressive. The prosecution disagreed. They brought in Carmen Beasley, a woman who lived near the scene of the accident. She testified that she heard a loud crash outside her home sometime after midnight. Scared, she waited for a short while before peeking out and realized that a woman, later identified as Renisha, had crashed into her husband's parked car on the street. Carmen observed that Renisha seemed confused, looking like she'd been drinking, and had a bloody hand from an injury. According to Carmen's testimony, Renisha did not seem aggressive, but she appeared to be intoxicated. "I watched a little bit," Carmen stated, explaining that Renisha walked away from the crash while holding her head. She also mentioned that she inquired if the teenager was all right and offered to call someone for help using her cell phone. She recalled that Renisha patted her pockets and repeatedly expressed her desire to go home. Earlier in the proceedings, jurors were presented with images from the scene. These photographs showed various aspects, including a torn screen door, a shotgun resting on the floor near the front door, a spent shotgun shell casing, a gun case, and images of Renisha's body covered in blood. The impact of these visuals was visible, leading several of Renisha's relatives to leave the courtroom as the images were displayed on a large screen. As the testimonies continued, Assistant Wayne County Prosecutor Daniel Hageman Clark shared a revealing audio recording from a responding officer's microphone with the jury. In the recording, an officer's voice can be heard asking, "Where's the gun?" To which Theodore Wafer responded, "It's on the ground inside the landing right there." Following this exchange, police inquired about the events leading up to the incident. Theodore's voice conveyed his account in a transcript provided to jurors, and he was heard saying, "A consistent knocking on the door, and I'm trying to look through the windows, but every time I look through the windows and the door, it's banging somewhere else. So I open up the door, kind of like, 'Who is it?' and the gun discharged." He continued, "I don't get it. Who's knocking on your door at 4:30 in the morning? Bang, bang, bang. Someone wants in." When the defense argued that Theodore's actions were justified, prosecutors maintained that his choices led to a situation where death or grave bodily harm was likely. They asserted that his actions were unnecessary, unjustified, and unreasonable. During the testimony, further details emerged. Dearborn Heights Police Corporal Parinello shared that he had to remove 6 to 8 maggots from Renisha's clothing. The question arose, how did the maggots end up in her clothes? One of the officers did say that when Ms. Renisha was at the medical examiner's office, there was another gurney with some tissue on it, which turned out to be deer meat that had maggots on it, Parinello explained. This contact led to a transfer of maggots on Renisha's clothing, he testified. While the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office confirmed that they don't have deer meat or store animals unless it's linked to a crime, spokesperson Mary Mazur for the Medical Examiner's Office highlighted that bodies often arrive at the office in various stages of decomposition. It's a regular occurrence associated with death scenes, Mazur explained. On August 7, 2014, Theodore Wafer was found guilty on all 3 charges against him, which included second-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, and possession of a firearm during a felony. Before he was sentenced, Theodore apologized to Renisha's family. He acknowledged his role in the loss of a young life. He said he'd forever carry the weight of guilt and sorrow, his emotions occasionally causing pauses in his words. He admitted that his irrational fear caused him to take one of God's children. Following his apology, his defense attorney, Cheryl Carpenter, was visibly emotional and tearful, stating that Theodore had displayed more remorse than any client she'd encountered. She claimed that he deserved a sentence within the parameters of a manslaughter conviction. Despite being found guilty of second-degree murder, manslaughter, and a weapons felony firearm charge, she pleaded to appeal the ruling. The second-degree murder conviction could have led to life imprisonment, while manslaughter holds a maximum penalty of 15 years. An extra felony firearm charge carries an obligatory 2-year sentence, as Michigan law mandates such an additional term when a person possesses a firearm during the commission or attempted commission of a felony. Eventually, Theodore was sentenced to 17 to 32 years in prison on September 3, 2014. This sentence includes 15 to 30 years for second-degree murder and an obligatory 2-year duration for the felony firearms charge. After the sentencing, Judge Dana Margaret Hathaway addressed Wafer, saying, "I'm confident that if you weren't going to prison today, you'd never commit another crime. I fully recognize that you did not bring these circumstances to your doorstep. They arrived there. But once you did, you made the choices that brought you here today." Additionally, the prosecution admitted that the sentence was fair and just. Following the end of the legal proceedings, Renisha's sister, Jasmine, expressed her satisfaction with the sentence, stating, "I'm very happy. I believe justice was served, and I believe my sister can rest peacefully now." Renisha's father, Walter Simmons, concurred, stating, "It was a great decision. He got what he deserved."
Justice was served. Justice was served, and they gave him the time that he deserved.
The ripple effect of Renisha McBride's tragic demise extended beyond the courtroom. Her death became a focal point of the Black Lives Matter movement, which sought to bring attention to the injustices faced by African Americans in the United States. It didn't help that her case happened shortly after several other widely reported shooting deaths of young black individuals. Among these were Jonathan Farrell in North Carolina in September 2013, Jordan Davis in Jacksonville, Florida in November 2013, and Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida in February 2012. These incidents ignited protests, candlelight vigils, and a national discourse on topics like gun control, racial issues, and laws related to self-defense. In February 2022, following the appeal of Theodore's lawyers, the Michigan Supreme Court intervened. The court ordered a resentencing for Theodore, asserting that his constitutional protection against double jeopardy was breached by his dual convictions for second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter arising from a singular incident. Consequently, on June 22, 2022, he was resentenced to a fixed 17-year imprisonment. This new sentence makes him eligible to apply for parole in 2031. The ruling stood despite the protestations and disapproval of the McBride family and several civil rights groups. Today's story shows the consequences of making harsh and irrational decisions, but it also raises questions about racial profiling and gun control in the United States. What do you think of the sentence handed to Theodore? Is it adequate for the crime committed, or should he have gotten a lesser sentence? The morning of May 4th, 2010 started brightly in Edinburgh, Scotland. Like every other day in the past year, 38-year-old Suzzane Pilley, a dedicated bookkeeper at Infrastructure Managers Limited on Thistle Street, Edinburgh, began her routine journey to work. However, the quiet and ordinary day took an unsettling turn when Suzanne's colleagues reported her unusual disappearance from work. CCTV footage showed Suzzane close to her workplace before she suddenly vanished. What happened to Suzzane Pilley? Was there an explanation behind her mysterious disappearance, or was it all a prank? Our story today takes us to Edinburgh in 2010. Edinburgh is Scotland's capital city and the second most populous city after Glasgow. It holds great importance as the seat of the Scottish Government, Parliament, and highest courts. With strong educational and financial sectors, Edinburgh also boasts cultural and historic attractions that draw tourists. Time Out magazine even rated it the best city in the world in 2022. The city's population is approximately 518,000 for the council area and 1.38 million for the broader city region. In terms of crime, around 36,000 crimes were reported in the capital in 2010 and 2011, with a solve rate of 43%. The people of Edinburgh have a strong sense of community and neighborhood pride. It's in this city that Suzzane Pilley lived. Suzzane Pilley was born in 1972, and she was a vibrant and outgoing Scottish bookkeeper from the enchanting city of Edinburgh. Raised with her sister Gail Pilley by her loving parents Robert and Sylvia Pilley, Suzzane grew up in a nurturing environment that instilled in her a strong sense of compassion and community. Her unique blend of curiosity and empathy made her stand out from an early age. She was not just content with routine. She sought to embrace life's wonders with an infectious enthusiasm that touched everyone she encountered. One of Suzanne's defining characteristics was her unwavering happiness. She radiated an aura of positivity that was hard to miss. Her love for the outdoors was clear to everyone. She thrived in nature's embrace, finding solace in its beauty. An avid supporter of charitable causes, she embodied the belief in giving back to the community that shaped her. Having gone through a divorce in the past, Suzanne's outlook on life remained positive. She was resolute in her approach to dating, embracing each opportunity with optimism and an open heart. Professionally, Suzzane flourished as a dedicated bookkeeper employed by Infrastructure Managers Limited. She worked there for nearly 2 years. This skillful attention to detail was mirrored in her personal life, where she pursued her passions with similar enthusiasm. Her workplace admired her for the energy she brought to every task. She was a very important team member and rarely absent from work. On May 4, 2010, Suzzane Pilley's day started like any other. She left her home on Whitson Road at 8 in the morning to work, but little did anyone know that this was the last time she would ever be seen again. Suzzane Pilley was supposed to start work at 9 in the morning, but by almost 10 o'clock, she was still not at the office. When her colleagues noticed she wasn't at her desk, they got worried. It was unlike Suzzane to be absent from work without reason, so they contacted her parents, Robert and Sylvia Pilley. Suzzane had sent a text to her parents that morning at 8:30. She told them she was on her way to work. When Suzanne's colleagues contacted her parents, they confirmed they hadn't heard from her since that morning text. Worried and anxious, the parents tried calling her phone, but it wasn't connected. In the afternoon of May 4, 2010, Suzanne's parents reported her missing to the police. The police swung into action. They checked her apartment and workplace, questioned her neighbors, and even traced her route, but there was no sign of Suzzane. In the days after she went missing, the police asked for help from the public. They talked to people who knew Suzzane. They checked her bank cards and phone, but there was no activity. She didn't use her bus pass either, and she didn't call her friends or family. Her family was sure she wouldn't just leave without telling anyone. Her pet fish and cat were still at home. It was out of character for Suzzane to leave her pets unattended too. The police investigation led them to check CCTV footage, at least to track her movement. From the footage, the police saw that on May 4, 2010, the day she disappeared, she'd caught a bus from Stevenson Drive and then another from Dullery Road, opposite Caledonian Terrace. She got off the bus at 8:48 a.m. on Princess Street outside Jenner's. She made her customary stop at the St. Andrew's Square branch of Sainsbury's and was seen on CCTV leaving Sainsbury's at 8:51 a.m. A few minutes later, at 8:54 a.m., another camera spotted her on North St. David Street, about to turn onto Thistle Street. Suzzane walked to her workplace, Infrastructure Management on Thistle Street. She was last seen on CCTV close to the building where she worked, just 20 meters from her office. But after this, she seemed to disappear. On May 10, 2010, the police widened their search for Suzzane. They pleaded that anyone with information should come forward. They even put up big screens in the middle of Edinburgh to show where Suzzane Pilley was last seen. By May 18, 2010, the people Suzzane worked for said her vanishing was very unusual for them. The very next day, the police said that they were now looking into her case as a murder. Suzanne's dad, Robert, said, "It's like she vanished into thin air, like some sort of mystery. It's really hard to believe. She texted me and her mom, and then, within 30 minutes, she was gone. How can someone disappear like that? Suzzane wasn't worried or sad. This is so unlike her. She was just herself, like every other day when she left for work." While Suzane's family and friends continued worrying and searching for clues as to her whereabouts, the police intensified their search. And soon, something caught their eye. A silver car was caught on camera taking an unusual route in and out of Argyle Forest around the period of Suzane's disappearance. On May 20th, 2010, the media reported a significant development in the investigation. The police had widened their search to cover a vast area of Argyle, spanning 400 square miles, about 1,000 square kilometers, from Tindrum to Inverurie and the Argyle Forest. Their focus was on tracing the path of a silver vehicle driven by a man along remote roads in Argyle and Butte on the afternoon of May 5th, 2010. The police began asking Suzane's neighbors questions, and soon they found out that there was a man that used to stay over at her place. The police intensified their search to find out who this mystery man was. Not long after, their search bore fruit. David Gilroy, a married man and colleague of Suzane, was discovered to have been having an affair with Suzane. The police interviewed him, but his answers and accounts were not convincing. On June 23, 2010, David Gilroy, a former boyfriend and colleague of Suzane, was taken into custody by Lothian and Borders Police under Section 14 of the Criminal Procedure Scotland Act, 1995. The same day, he was arrested and charged with her murder. On June 24, 2010, David attended a private hearing at Edinburgh Sheriff Court. He was charged with multiple crimes, including the murder of Suzzane Pilley and other offenses tied to her disappearance. During the hearing, he neither entered a plea nor made a statement. A request for bail was put forth and approved by Sheriff Diederik McNeil. On July 1, 2010, David returned to Edinburgh Sheriff Court for another private hearing, this time for judicial examination. Following this, he was deemed fit for trial and fully committed to the legal process. A second petition for bail was submitted and accepted by Sheriff Nigel Morrison. On February 20, 2012, the trial of David Gilroy commenced at the High Court of Judiciary, specifically in Court 11 at Edinburgh Sheriff Court. The presiding judge overseeing the proceedings was Lord Brackadale. The prosecution was led by Advocate Deputy Alex Prentice, while Jack Davidson handled the defense. Guiding David Gilroy's legal matters was his solicitor, Jim Wardlaw. The indictment extended to 5 pages, outlining the primary charges, which alleged that on May 4, 2010, David took the life of Suzane at Infrastructure Managers Limited offices on Thistle Street in Edinburgh or elsewhere, using means that remained unknown to the prosecutor. Also, David was accused of concealing Suzane's body within the Thistle Street premises, then transporting it in a car's boot to various places around Scotland, including Argyle, and eventually disposing of it secretly. The trial consisted of a jury of 8 men and 7 women who began to hear evidence on the afternoon of February 20, 2012. This extensive trial lasted for 24 days. The initial witness for the crime was Sylvia Pilley, the mother of Suzzane Pilley. She shared that her daughter and David Gilroy had an intermittent and tumultuous relationship, which included periods of being together and apart. She also mentioned that Suzane had lived with David temporarily at times. On February 23, 2012, an advocate deputy presented testimony from a Lothian and Borders Police constable. This officer informed the court that they'd engaged specialized cadaver dogs from South Yorkshire Police to search the workplaces of David Gilroy and Suzzane Pilley. These dogs were trained to detect the scent of blood and human remains. Specifically, the Springer Spaniels identified 3 areas of interest: 1 within the office's basement and 2 within the trunk of David Gilroy's silver Vauxhall Vectra. The following day, on February 24, 2012, the court heard from Jacqueline Butterwick, a forensic imagery expert who had analyzed footage on behalf of the police. She explained that the CCTV footage captured an individual on Thistle Street, and this person bore significant resemblance to Suzzane Pilley and other CCTV images taken on the same day. The distance from her workplace's entrance was about 20 meters. This expert assertion affirmed that the person in the footage was indeed Suzzane Pilley. On February 27, 2012, Andrea Gilroy, the wife of David Gilroy, was called as a witness by the Crown in the trial. As she approached the stand, Lord Brackadale, the trial judge, clarified that she had the option to abstain from testifying against her husband if she chose to do so. Ultimately, she decided not to provide evidence. This choice was available because the events she might have discussed occurred prior to the enactment of Section 86 of the Criminal Justice and Licensing Scotland Act 2010. This amendment changed the law to render spouses and civil partners of an accused person in Scotland both competent and compellable witnesses for the prosecution. On March 1, 2012, the Advocate Deputy presented evidence from Sergeant Paul Granger of Lothian and Borders Police. He elaborated on the details of an extensive 11-hour interview that David had undergone with the police on May 6, 2010. Granger noted that during the interview, he observed a scar beneath David's hairline on his forehead, as well as a scratch on his chin. The court also heard that David had informed the police that on the evening of May 2, 2010, both he and Suzzane had decided to end their relationship. They'd taken part in a spiritual ceremony with a Buddhist influence, expressing their emotions on paper and subsequently burning them. On March 6, 2012, forensic scientist Kirsty McTurk was called upon to testify. She revealed that she had conducted a comprehensive DNA search in both Pilley's workplace and the trunk of David's car. Importantly, she confirmed that she'd been unable to uncover any traces of Suzzane's DNA in either location. McTurk informed the court that upon opening the boot of David's car, she detected a fresh scent emanating from within. She indicated that this aroma could be either an air freshener or a cleaning agent. Subsequently, the court heard from Suzzane Pilley's friend, Gail Hawkins. Hawkins disclosed that Pilley had expressed concerns to her about David potentially hacking into her email account. During the trial, Advocate Deputy Alex Prentice presented phone records as evidence, demonstrating that David had maintained almost daily contact with Suzzane prior to her disappearance. Strikingly, this communication abruptly ceased on the day before she went missing. The record showed that David was in the habit of sending Suzzane over 50 text messages daily. Their last phone interaction occurred on May 3, 2010, when he sent her 15 text messages and a voicemail.
Hi Suzzane, it's David here. Give me a phone back, please. I just want to have a wee chat with you. See if you need a lift or anything. Just give me a phone back, even just for a couple of minutes.
On March 7, 2012, forensic pathologist Nathaniel Carey testified before the jury, revealing crucial insights about David Gilroy's physical state on May 6, 2010. Carey described curved scratches on David's hands, a forehead cut, chest bruises, and additional scratches on his hands, wrists, and forearms. He displayed corresponding photographs in court as visual evidence. Corey stated that these scratches could have been the result of someone's fingernails, potentially indicating a struggle around the time of Suzzane Pilley's disappearance. He noted that the injuries resembled those he'd previously observed in strangulation cases, although their visibility had been reduced by a makeup-like substance applied to them. During cross-examination, Carey acknowledged that the hand scratches could also have come from gardening activities. On March 8, 2012, the trial heard from a Lothian and Borders police constable who detailed how they partially reconstructed David Gilroy's car journey to Loch Gilfeed on May 5, 2010 using CCTV footage. Through extensive analysis of the footage, the police replicated the journey multiple times. It emerged that David's travel time had exceeded the average duration by 2 hours each way. More so, a comparison of fuel consumption data indicated that around 124 miles, that is, about 200 kilometers of David's trip remained unaccounted for, raising additional questions about his movements on that day. The prosecution's evidence ended with these proceedings. On March 9, 2012, the Crown decided to withdraw several charges from the indictment, including those related to assault, breach of peace, and a contravention of the Computer Misuse Act 1990. The charges of murder and attempting to defeat the ends of justice, marked as charges 6 and 7 respectively, remained in place. The defense case commenced on the morning of March 12, 2012, lasting half a day. Various witnesses from the offices of Infrastructure Managers Limited testified, stating that nothing unusual was observed at the Thistle Street premises on May 4, 2010. In an interesting development, David Gilroy chose not to testify in his defense. On the afternoon of March 12, 2012, Advocate Deputy Alex Prentice addressed the jury. He presented the Crown's case, asserting that David had murdered Suzzane in the basement of her office and concealed her body in a recess. David, according to Prentice, later took Suzzane's body to the trunk of his car and then drove her to what he called a lonely grave in Argyll. He pointed out how Suzzane's sudden disappearance was unlike her. He stressed that the lack of communication, credit card use, and pet arrangements were unusual for her. Prentice also pointed to the lack of calls and texts from David after Suzzane went missing, implying that he had her phone and knew she was no longer alive. The prosecutor noted that instead of assisting the police inquiry, David embarked on an inconsequential journey the day after her disappearance. On the morning of March 13, 2012, Jack Davidson began summarizing the defense's case. He urged the jury to assess the evidence with objectivity, stating that it would be unsafe to convict David Gilroy of murder based on the circumstantial nature of the Crown's presentation. On the afternoon of March 13, 2012, the jury began deliberations to reach their verdict. After 2.5 days of careful consideration, on March 15, 2012, David Gilroy was declared guilty by a majority verdict of murdering Suzzane Pilley and attempting to obstruct justice. On April 18, 2012, in Court 3 of the High Court of Judiciary in Edinburgh, Lord Brackadale delivered David Gilroy's sentence.
Suzzane Pilley was obviously a respected and well-liked member of staff in Thistle Street in the office in which you and she both worked. In May 2010, she was starting a new chapter in her personal life, and that included bringing to an end her relationship with you. On the 4th of May, she set out to go to work pretty much as usual. Then she just disappeared, and the jury were satisfied on the evidence before them that was because you murdered her and disposed of her body. On charge 6, the charge of murder, I sentence you, as I am required by law to do, to life imprisonment. I am also required to order that you serve a number of years as a punishment part of the sentence. Having regard to all the circumstances, I order that you serve a punishment part of 18 years, which will be backdated to 13 March 2012.
Although found guilty and sentenced, David Gilroy maintained his innocence. On April 27, 2012, he formally indicated his intention to appeal his conviction under Section 1091 of the Criminal Procedure Scotland Act 1995, filing with the Court of Judiciary. However, the Court of Criminal Appeal in Edinburgh rejected the appeal on December 20, 2012. In June 2017, the Scottish Criminal Case Review Commission concluded its review of the case. Despite thorough searches during both the police investigation and the trial, Suzzane Pilley's body remains undiscovered. It's believed that her remains might be buried in a forest somewhere in Argyll. Initially, David Gilroy was placed in HMP Edinburgh, a facility not typically used for those serving life sentences. David chose not to be isolated from the general prison population. However, due to threats from fellow inmates, he was later moved to HMP Shotts. Reports surfaced indicating that on his first day at HMP Shotts, David was attacked by other prisoners, resulting in a broken jaw. This occurred after he told fellow inmates about his plans for release through an appeal. In 2018, the Scotland Police released a video where Suzanne's mother Sylvia and sister Gail detailed how Suzanne's death affected them and how not finding her body deprived them of closure.
I think every time she's mentioned, you struggle with the fact that she's not been found. I think it's hard to think about her because we just don't know where she is. And that's the first thought that comes in to your head when she's mentioned is just, where are you? So it's extremely difficult to not know where she is and to not have laid her to rest. You know, she wasn't treated with any dignity in her death. She was discarded and we just do not know where she is. And that is just sometimes unbearable. But, you know, we have to move forward. And I would love to be able to just give her that, you know, that funeral, that dignity that every person deserves. But, you know, unfortunately we can't do that.
Just we feel that I feel, and my husband feels that it's as if she didn't matter and she's gone, and we can't do anything about it. So we have to rely on the public if they're out and about in that area, maybe dog walkers, and we've been fortunate with the forestry workers. Have been very good. In any position that looks as if it's been disturbed, they notify the police. And we're very grateful for that, because we hope one day she will be found.
Suzzane Pilley's story is a reminder that evil lurks even in our seemingly safe spaces. It calls on us to live every day to the fullest, because we don't know the horror that may lie at the corner of our workplace, home, or our favorite grocery shop. Do you think that justice was served for Suzzane Pilley? Do you agree with the High Court of Judiciary's decision to sentence David Gilroy to life imprisonment based on circumstantial evidence and without the body of Suzzane Pilley being found?
Tell me about your brother.
Recently, him and I were not talking. He hated me. My brother was very, very, very irate to me. From that moment on, you can read his text. From that moment on, my brother was pure evil to me, accusing me of sending numerous threatening texts to his wife. Are you guys listening to me or something?
No, we're just trying to get, like I said, we're just trying to get as much information as we can.
I didn't do that robbery. And I don't want to be pregnant to my brother.
No, I'm not saying that you did. All right? Well, like I said, we're just trying to get as much information as we can.
It was scary. Okay.
On Sunday, September 22nd, 2013, shortly after 1:28 a.m., 3 911 calls were made reporting a shooting outside the Paladin Club apartment in Wilmington, Delaware.
I just heard arguing, and the last thing I heard was what the and then 3 gunshots.
Obviously, she's hurt.
Okay.
There's blood all over her face. I think she's conscious, but she's pretty weak.
Okay, is she able to talk at all?
She might, but I'm not sure.
Is she still breathing?
I think she's breathing, but she's in trouble.
Okay, we're almost there. I just want you to keep her comfortable and just make sure she's still breathing, okay?
She's laying on the ground. She has blood all over her body.
When officers from the Newcastle County Police Department arrived at the scene, they found Joe Connell and his wife Olga, both aged 39, bleeding from several gunshot wounds to their heads. Joe was pronounced dead at the scene. Olga would succumb to her injuries on the way to the hospital. Initially, it looked like a robbery gone horribly wrong, but as investigators dug deeper, a more twisted plot began to unfold. Had Joe and Olga found themselves on the wrong side of someone dangerous? Or was there someone who envied the couple's good fortune? Wilmington is the largest city in the state of Delaware and is the county seat of Newcastle County and has a population of 70,000. It's also the hometown of United States President Joe Biden. Wilmington is known for being the corporate capital of the United States and has had several historic landmarks which include the DuPont family home and the Nemours estate. However, Wilmington has a more notorious reputation. It's also known as Murder Town, as the rate of homicide reached a peak in 2017 of 32 people being killed that year alone. Although police intervention has brought this alarming rate down, gun violence remains the greatest concern for residents. In 2013, it was a similar act of violence that ended the lives of Joe and Olga Connell. Joseph Michael Connell was born on January 24, 1974, to Millicent, Mickey, and Thomas Connell in Wilmington, Delaware. He was the second of 3 siblings, with an older brother named John and younger sister named Kelly. Their parents divorced but remained on good terms. Joe was known as the fun guy, and people naturally gravitated towards him. In 2003, however, Joe was involved in an altercation at a bar. He was arrested and charged with 2 counts each of aggravated menacing, possession of a firearm during a felony, and resisting arrest. He spent 6 years imprisoned at the Young Correctional Institute in Wilmington, Delaware. In 2010, Joe was released and decided to make a fresh start in his life. He bought a share in CNS Automotive Repair after being introduced by a friend to Chris Rivers, another Wilmington native. Together, the men turned their hobby of repairing cars into a booming business. Joe had also started looking for love when he met Olga Retina on an online dating site. Olga was born on September 10, 1974, in Chita, Russia. She had a degree in chemistry and physics and always yearned to move to America. In 2006, she enlisted as a mail-order bride. Olga met and married an engineer named Kamal Helmi, who was living and working in Delaware. The couple divorced amicably in November 2009. Olga stayed at the Paladin Club apartment they'd bought together, and Kamal relocated to Texas. Olga worked at the perfume counter at the local Macy's and traded stocks online in her spare time. After their first date in 2010, both Joe and Olga fell madly in love. Olga's friend, Natalia Herzog, said that Olga gushed over Joe, telling her that he was the man she'd always been looking for. Joe, who was a confirmed bachelor, had also changed according to his family. Joe told them that Olga was the woman of his dreams. Joe moved in with Olga soon after they started dating in 2010, and Olga eventually joined Joe and Chris at their auto repair shop as their receptionist. When Joe wasn't at work or at the gym, he was spending time with Olga. He eventually proposed to her. They lived a lavish lifestyle, spending thousands of dollars on weekends away, gourmet foods, and expensive jewelry and cars. Joe even gifted Olga with a brand new Mercedes-Benz worth over $100,000. Their fast-paced lifestyle raised eyebrows, but many believed that Joe was just making up for lost time. Then, in 2013, Joe and Olga finally decided to get married. On June 7, 2013, Joe married Olga in an intimate wedding ceremony on the Caribbean island of St. John. They were talking about settling down and starting a family of their own. On Saturday, September 21, 2013, Joe and Olga joined family and friends at the Firestone restaurant in Wilmington to enjoy a late celebration of Olga's 39th birthday. It was a merry event, as everyone wished the newlywed couple a prosperous future together. Both Joe and Olga seemed in high spirits throughout the evening. As the night drew to a close, the couple shared one last dance before the restaurant closed. Unbeknownst to anyone, it would be their final dance. The Newcastle County Police Department received 3 frantic calls for help just after 1:28 a.m. on Sunday, September 22, 2013. Residents from the Paladin Club apartment complex reported hearing shouting followed by multiple gunshots.
I just heard arguing, and the last thing I heard was what the and then 3 gunshots.
Obviously, she's hurt.
Okay.
There's blood all over her face. I think she's conscious, but she's pretty weak.
Okay, is she able to talk at all?
She might. I'm not sure.
Is she still breathing?
I think she's breathing, but she's in trouble.
Okay, we're almost there. I just want you to keep her comfortable and just make sure she's still breathing, okay?
She's laying on the ground. She has blood all over her body.
When officers and paramedics arrived, they found several residents standing near a blonde woman whom they identified as Olga Connell, one of the residents. She'd suffered a gunshot wound to the face and was bleeding heavily. Miraculously, she was still breathing. Olga was tended to by paramedics and rushed to Wilmington Hospital. Just a few feet away, partially hidden by the shrubbery, was the body of a man. Residents told officers that the man was Joe Connell, Olga's husband. He'd been shot several times in the back of the head and was pronounced dead at the scene by paramedics. Within minutes of the ambulance leaving, investigators received more bad news. Olga had passed away on the way to the hospital. The couple, who'd only been married for a mere 107 days, now both lay dead. Investigators were dealing with a double homicide.
Newcastle County Police are trying to figure out who killed a well-known business owner and his new wife. It all happened late Saturday night in the Paladin Club apartments in Wilmington. NBC 10 Delaware Bureau Chief Tim Furlong spoke to friends of the victim and police about the killings.
Witnesses told police they heard men shouting and then the gunshots outside this building in the Paladin Club apartments in the early hours of Sunday morning. 39-year-old Joe Connell and his wife Olga, married just a few months, killed outside on the front steps.
Detectives needed to start by retracing the steps of Joe and Olga and figure out exactly what happened. In the door to their apartment was a set of house keys. Investigators surmised that they were ambushed just before they could enter the apartment. Gun violence was rampant in Wilmington, and the possibility that it was a robbery gone wrong made the most sense. But scattered around the crime scene was enough evidence to dispel that theory. Both Joe and Olga's phones were found on the ground, along with both their wallets and Olga's purse with around $500 in cash still inside. A quick call to the investigation team that went ahead to Wilmington Hospital confirmed that Olga was still wearing her diamond ring. The investigators' next possible theory was that Joe and Olga were targeted by someone they knew. Around 20 shell casings were found at the scene, and this suggested overkill. It was a brutal attack on the couple, and investigators were determined to get some answers from the people who knew them best. Joe's parents were the first to be contacted. His mother, Mickey, and her husband, Jerry Keller, were visited by police officers who broke the news to them. They couldn't think of anyone who would want to hurt Joe or Olga, but did mention an incident that occurred 6 weeks earlier. According to Mickey and Jerry, someone had broken into the couple's apartment on July 31st, 2013. No one was at home at the time, but several pieces of jewelry valued at thousands of dollars were stolen.
Is there anybody that might want to hurt him, ma'am?
I don't know.
Was he complaining about having problems with anyone?
Jerry, you tell them about the robbery. Oh, no.
Somebody broke into their house.
No.
How long was that? Did they report to the police?
Kelly, Joe's younger sister, happened to be at her mother's house when police arrived. She then mentioned to police that she and Joe recently had a fallout.
We were fighting and he wasn't talking to me. And now he's dead.
Investigators then asked Kelly to accompany them to the station for questioning. She was visibly distraught, but agreed to speak to the officers. She told investigators about her fight with Joe over a family heirloom, a ring worth $20,000.
Tell me about your brother.
Recently him and I were not talking. He hated me. My brother was very, very, very irate to me. From that moment on, you can read his text. From that moment on, my brother was pure evil to me, accusing me of sending numerous threatening texts to his wife. Are you not listening to me or something?
No. We're just trying to get, like I said, we're just trying to get as much information as we can.
I didn't do that robbery. And I don't want to be pregnant to my brother.
No, I'm not saying that you did. All right. Well, like I said, we're just trying to get as much information as we can.
It was scary. Okay.
This ring was given to Kelly by her mother, Mickey, when she got married 10 years earlier. However, after her divorce, her mother took the ring back, and when Joe met Olga, Mickey gave Joe the ring to propose to Olga. This upset Kelly so much that Joe returned the ring to her. However, Kelly immediately noticed that the diamonds from the ring had been removed and replaced with cubic zirconia. Kelly admitted to confronting Joe about the deception and told investigators about her bitter feud with Joe and Olga. She even showed detectives the nasty text messages exchanged between herself and Joe. She admitted to investigators that Olga had openly accused her of being responsible for the robbery in July, but she denied the accusation. Still not convinced of her innocence, investigators pushed Kelly to provide an alibi. She then revealed to investigators that she'd undergone treatment for breast cancer and was recovering on the day Joe and Olga were gunned down. Kelly was allowed to take a break from the interview, but investigators were still on the fence about her innocence. There was the possibility that Kelly could have hired hitmen to kill Joe and Olga. It was then that investigators began questioning Kelly's fiancé, Garrett Catalano. He provided investigators with a story similar to that of Kelly's, but added a piece of information that now changed the course of the investigation. Garrett told investigators that Joe had been dealing drugs as a sideline business to support his lifestyle. According to Garrett, Joe carried out his operation from his auto repair shop in Wilmington. Kelly was called back to the interview room and asked what possible reason would someone have to hurt Joe or Olga. Kelly too revealed that Joe had been dealing drugs.
I would have to guess this robbery and this murder are connected by some other drug people.
Investigators then turned their attention to Joe's business partner, Chris Rivers. At around 6:30 a.m. on Sunday, September 22, 2013, officers from the Newcastle County Police Department knocked on the door of Chris Rivers. They didn't tell him about the murders of Joe and Olga, but asked if he could come down to the station to answer some questions about Joe. Chris reportedly asked police if Joe had gotten himself into trouble again. At the station, they started the interview by asking Chris about his relationship with Joe. They then asked Chris if Joe had been tangled up in any shady business lately. Chris began his answers by asking investigators not to repeat whatever he was about to tell them to Joe. He then went on to tell investigators that one of their employees informed him about Joe selling steroids from the auto shop.
Finally, I wasn't there one day, and the other guy that works for me comes up to me and goes, "Joe's selling drugs out of the back of the shop." And I was like, "What?" So I searched the shop, found him, and said to him, "Get him out. I don't want it here. I'm not losing the frickin' place over this."
What was he selling?
Steroids.
Chris explained to investigators that when he confronted Joe about the steroid sales, it led to an argument between the two of them. Another thing Chris told investigators was that he believed Joe's sideline business was the reason he could afford such a lavish lifestyle. It was after Chris answered these questions that investigators informed him of Joe and Olga's murders. He took the news badly at first, and then told investigators that he'd gone down to meet the couple at the restaurant. However, he forgot his ID and had to turn around and go back home.
At 11, I went down there. It was around 10:30. But I didn't have my ID on me, so I had to drive all the way home.
Chris allowed investigators to search the auto repair shop and retrieve any CCTV footage they required. He also provided the CCTV footage from his own home security system and gave them access to all the business paperwork they needed. It was during the search of the business on September 22, 2013, that investigators found various anabolic steroids and over 200 needles. Chris was arrested, and this generated public interest soon after the murders. He was able to make the bail payment of $10,100 and was released on September 24, 2013. Rumors began to spread about his involvement in the case, prompting Chris to hire himself a lawyer. He then agreed to give a videotaped interview to a local newspaper, the News Journal. In the interview, he described Joe as being his best friend. He also denied any involvement in the deaths of Joe and Olga.
Figures you see somebody every day, 12 hours a day more than you see your wife. So we were pretty much best friends.
When was the last thing you did together? When was the last time you saw him?
I was together Friday with him. And then Saturday I was supposed to meet him down with everybody at the bar. He's a great guy. There's nothing that he would ever do to make anybody angry, ever.
Media interest began to dwindle as the months went by, and no new leads were uncovered. But investigators remained interested in one person, Chris Rivers. During his initial interview with investigators, Chris painted Joe as being irresponsible with the management of the business. But he too had dipped his fingers into the money pot at work. Before Joe joined as a partner at CNS Auto Repair in 2012, Chris had another partner, Sean Terranova. Chris and Sean both opened their first repair shop in 2008, and business was doing well. That was until Sean discovered Chris was abusing drugs and doing deals from the shop. After dissolving their partnership, Chris found himself drowning in personal debts amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars and facing several lawsuits from suppliers. Added to that, Chris was also facing his own demons. He'd become addicted to illicit substances and prescription painkillers. Looking through financial records, investigators discovered that both Chris and Joe were funneling money from the business credit account to fund their lifestyles. Investigators looked through the business documents and paperwork. They came across an interesting detail that could have spelled possible motive. When Chris and Joe decided to become partners, they bought a joint life insurance policy valued at $1 million. This was to ensure that if either partner died while they were still in business, the other would receive the money in order to pay off the mortgage on the business. The only problem was that Olga was married to Joe, and she'd become the beneficiary of that policy, not Chris. Investigators theorized that Chris needed to eliminate both Joe and Olga in order to collect on the insurance. It was a theory and circumstantial evidence at best, but another twist to the tale was about to reveal itself. While speaking to associates of both Chris and Joe, they were directed to a man named Harry Cook. Harry was a local drug dealer who often supplied Chris with illicit substances and prescription drugs. From Harry, investigators learned that Chris was not as happy with Joe in recent years. According to Harry, Chris often complained about Joe and Olga's lifestyle. He'd gone as far as to tell Harry that he believed Joe was embezzling from the business. Harry then alleged that Chris once spoke about killing both Joe and Olga so he could take over the business entirely. Harry pointed out to investigators that he told Chris he wanted nothing to do with that plan. The financial motive was fast becoming the most likely reason for the murder of the Connells, but investigators needed more than just a theory and circumstantial evidence. They needed to look back at the video proof they had of Chris. They looked through the surveillance footage provided by Chris. There was something that didn't add up. In his initial interview with police, Chris told investigators he'd gone down to the restaurant to meet with Joe and Olga at around 10:30 p.m. On his home surveillance footage, Chris was seen at home during that time, pacing through his house. What investigators found particularly interesting about the footage was that Chris was glued to his phone. They also found that in the interview Chris gave to the News Journal, he confirmed to reporter Chris Barish that he was at home the night of Olga's birthday celebration. From the video footage, they knew Chris was hiding something. They just needed to figure out what. Investigators were able to subpoena Chris's phone records from the night of September 21st to September 22nd, 2013. His phone activity showed that messages and phone calls made around the time of the shooting had been deleted. Fortunately, it was not a dead end yet. With technological advancements, forensic data analysts could retrieve the information. It would just take time. And the wait paid off. Investigators discovered that Chris was in contact with Joe throughout the night. He texted to ask about their evening and promised to join him for a beer. He also asked about their movements that night. As Chris received information, he forwarded these messages to another number. Data analysts were able to find the owner of that number, a drug dealer and former informant for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Joshua Bay. Investigators then subpoenaed Joshua's phone records and discovered he'd been in contact with two more men, Dominique Benson and Aaron Thompson. These names were also familiar to local law enforcement officials, as they were known to have been involved in the crime underbelly in Wilmington. After getting hold of all four men's cell phone records, investigators used this information to track their movements on the night of the murders. Cell phone tower analysis and video footage showed that Chris was at his home as he told the reporter. Joshua was working a night shift as a security guard, and this was backed up by surveillance footage. It was the phone of Aaron Thompson that last pinged off a cell tower near the home of the Connells. Investigators had their suspects. They now needed to put together all the pieces of the puzzle to make an arrest. In August 2014, investigators contacted Joshua and called him in for questioning regarding the murders of Joe and Olga Connell. He was offered a plea deal by investigators if he was willing to tell them the entire truth. Joshua agreed and proceeded to spill the beans on Chris. Joshua explained to investigators that he met Chris in 2011 after he took his car in for repairs at C&S Automotive Repairs. After he learned that Chris was a drug addict, he began supplying Chris with illicit substances and prescription drugs. Over the years, they developed a friendship based on their common interests. Chris's attitude started to change toward Joe after he became a partner in the business. Chris constantly complained about Joe and Olga's lifestyle and blamed much of the company's financial problems on Joe. Chris then turned to Joshua and asked him if he knew anyone who could kill Joe and Olga. This was in order for Chris to collect on the $1 million insurance policy that he and Joe had taken out. Olga needed to be eliminated too in case Joe provisioned for her in his will. The plan, Joshua said, started to take shape after Chris discovered an internal family feud between Joe and his sister Kelly. Chris then asked Joshua to help him stage a robbery of Joe and Olga's apartment on the night of July 31st, 2013. Joshua, assisted by Aaron, broke into the Connells' home and stole thousands of dollars worth of jewelry. The plan, according to Joshua, had worked. Chris told him that Joe was convinced Kelly was behind the robbery. Chris then planned to use Joe's steroid addiction and criminal past as the reason for the couple's murders. Chris gave Joshua $5,000 to hire two hitmen with a promise of a further $60,000 upon completion. On the night of September 21st, 2013, Chris and Joshua set up solid alibis for themselves. Chris was recorded on CCTV at his home, while Joshua was recorded on surveillance footage at his workplace. As the night progressed, Chris maintained contact with Joe and Joshua. Joshua then messaged Aaron and Dominique about Joe and Olga's movements into the early hours of September 22, 2013. According to Joshua, Aaron and Dominique waited outside the apartment complex of Joe and Olga Connell. As the couple returned, unaware of what awaited them, They were ambushed and executed as instructed by Chris Rivers. On September 3, 2014, Chris Rivers was arrested in connection with the murders of Joe and Olga Connell. He was remanded in custody without bond.
A man who portrayed himself as the grieving friend after his business partners were found dead will now spend the rest of his life in prison for their murders. Action News spoke to Christopher Rivers following the 2013 murders of Joseph and Olga Connell outside the Palladian Club condos in Edgemoor. Rivers told us how he couldn't imagine who would want to hurt his friends. But after a thorough investigation and a trial, a jury determined that Rivers, who owned CNS Auto Services with the Connells, murdered the couple with the help of 3 other people. Today, a judge sentenced him to 2 life sentences plus 50 years.
In April 2016, Chris Rivers was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony and first-degree conspiracy, and first-degree criminal solicitation. He was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 50 years. Joshua Bay received a 5-year sentence in September 2016 for conspiracy to murder after making a plea deal and turning state witness in Chris's murder-for-hire plot. The first gunman, Aaron Thompson, was found guilty of 2 counts of murder and weapons infractions in June 2017. He was sentenced to life in prison. The second gunman, Dominique Benson, was found guilty of first-degree conspiracy and sentenced to 5 years in prison. This was due to the fact that the jurors could not come to a verdict on the murder and weapon charges after Dominique stated that upon seeing Joe and Olga, he was unable to go through with the murders. For the families of Joe and Olga, their deaths have caused immense suffering. Olga's father, Anatoly Ivanovich Raitina, sent a letter to be read during the sentencing of Chris Rivers since he couldn't travel to America at the time. In it, he expressed his deep love for his daughter, who he said had gone to America to find her happily ever after. He also stated that nobody had the right to take a human life. Speaking on behalf of her family, Kelly Connell told reporters after the sentencing that her family had lost the light of their life. She remembered the joy Joe had brought them over the years and told reporters that watching her family suffer through his loss had been the hardest part. For Kelly, the deaths of Joe and Olga haunt her constantly, as she never got to say sorry to them and set things right before it was too late. The case of Christopher Rivers shows the extent to which some people are willing to go in order to satisfy their own greed. As Olga's father said, no person has the right to take the life of another. It's truly sad to see a beautiful couple cut down in the prime of their lives.
I guess I thought the same thing that everyone else did. How could this be? We're talking about generally the same neighborhood, and Arlington's not that big a community, the same type of crime, the same method of, or cause of death, I should say.
Richmond, Virginia was a relatively peaceful community in the early 1980s. However, everything changed in late 1987. Several homes were broken into within 3 months. Inside those homes, multiple women were tortured, killed, and strangled. The killer was careful not to leave any fingerprints behind, making it difficult for the police to identify the killer and arrest them. Because the killer's method involved strangling the victims, the press dubbed the murderer the Southside Strangler. But who was this Southside Strangler? And what pushed this person to kill? Richmond is the capital of Virginia and an historic city with a population of 226,000 people as of 2020. From 1972 to 1987, Virginia's overall violent crime rate was stable. However, it increased by 28% from 1987. Both the U.S. and Virginia crime rates climbed from 1987 to a peak in 1991. Richmond, Virginia stands out with a violent crime rate of 24.6, surpassing the U.S. average of 22.7, and a property crime rate of 55.9, higher than the U.S. average of 35.4. Nevertheless, the people are fun-loving and hospitable. It's here that our story takes place. On January 29, 1984, during the initial investigation of Carolyn Ham's death, the police received a significant tip from Muriel Ranzer. She was the sister of the man who discovered the body of Susan. She mentioned having seen David Vasquez, someone she'd known for several years, in the neighborhood around 8 p.m. on January 23rd. She described Vasquez as creepy and recalled seeing him leering at Ham when she sunbathed in her yard. Shortly after Muriel's call, the police received another tip from a man named Michael Ansari. He reported seeing Vasquez in the neighborhood on January 25th, just after Ham's body was found. Ansari found Vasquez's behavior strange, noting that while the entire neighborhood was concerned about the incident, Vasquez seemed disinterested and detached from the situation. David Vasquez, a 38-year-old former janitor at an Arlington high school, had an IQ of less than 70 and had been living in Manassas, Virginia, around 30 miles away from Arlington. Vasquez had a borderline mental impairment, lived with his mother, and worked at a fast food restaurant. Detectives Robert H. Carrig and Charles Shelton from Arlington County went to Manassas and brought Vasquez in for questioning on February 4, 1984. During the interrogation, which was recorded, Vasquez initially maintained that he'd not been in Arlington on the night of the crime. When asked about his whereabouts, he replied, "Stayed home like usual." He stuck to his denials until Detectives Carrig and Shelton falsely informed him that his fingerprints had been found in Carolyn Ham's home. Upon hearing this, Vasquez changed his response, saying, "Maybe I might have gone there for a visit." When questioned about how he would have traveled to Arlington, he mentioned that his mother was working and unable to drive. Unfortunately, he also didn't have a driver's license. During the questioning, David Vasquez initially struggled to recall the details of the crime. He mentioned being intimate with Ham, but couldn't remember what he used to tie her hands. Detective Shelton corrected him when he mentioned ropes or a belt, pointing out that it was the Venetian blind cord he'd used. When asked about Ham's death, Vasquez initially claimed to have stabbed her, but Shelton again corrected him, reminding him that he'd hanged her. Vasquez then admitted to the hanging. On February 6th, after realizing they hadn't given Vasquez a Miranda warning, Detectives Carrig and Shelton informed him of his rights. Vasquez now insisted he'd not been in Arlington recently. Later, as Carrig left the room, Vasquez suddenly expressed having horrible dreams, according to Detective Shelton's account. During the interrogation, Detective Shelton retrieved the tape recorder and asked David Vasquez to describe his dream. Vasquez hesitated, saying it was a horrible dream where he found himself in hell after breaking glass. He spoke of going upstairs in the dream and encountering the victim, Carol Ham, and engaging in a sexual encounter with her. He then described tying her hands at her request and, under pressure, admitted to hanging her. Vasquez expressed his distress, saying he didn't want to have that dream anymore. Following this, Vasquez was charged with murder, assault, and burglary. He was questioned again the next day, where he gave a similar taped description of his dream, and a forensic report indicated that hair recovered from the crime scene matched Vasquez's hair. Several months later, Vasquez's defense lawyers took action to prevent the use of certain statements in court, arguing that they were not given willingly. The court decided that the first two statements could not be used as evidence, but they allowed the third one, where Vasquez had signed a Miranda waiver, to be presented. This strange dream statement became a crucial part of the prosecution's case, along with eyewitness testimonies that placed Vasquez in Arlington before and after the crime. The credibility of both witnesses was called into question. Ranzer only came forward after her brother became a suspect, which made some doubt her reliability. Ansari's credibility was also challenged because no one else saw Vasquez in the neighborhood after Ham's body was discovered. Moreover, the blood type found at the crime scene did not match Vasquez's, and the shoe impressions outside the window didn't match any of his shoes. Those challenges arose during the trial. However, Commonwealth Attorney Henry Hudson persisted in his argument, suggesting that Vasquez might have had a co-conspirator. Despite the doubts and inconsistencies in the evidence, the prosecution kept pushing forward with the case. As the trial continued, Vasquez's lawyers advised him to consider a plea negotiation, given the weakness of the case. The gravity of the crime could sway a jury, and the death sentence was likely if convicted. On February 3, 1985, Vasquez entered an Alford plea, technically a guilty plea, but one that allowed him to maintain his innocence. After serving approximately 3 years of his 35-year sentence, Vasquez faced a new murder case eerily resembling the Ham crime. Susan Ann Tucker, a 44-year-old Department of Agriculture employee, was raped and strangled with a white thin nylon cord, mirroring the method used in Ham's case. Detective Joe Horgas, together with Detective Carrig, took on the Tucker case, and they couldn't ignore the striking similarities between the crimes.
I guess I thought the same thing that everyone else did. How could this be? We're talking about generally the same neighborhood, and Arlington's not that big a community, the same type of crime, the same method of, or cause of death, I should say.
This led them to suspect that David Vasquez might not have acted alone when he committed the murder of Ham. To delve deeper into this possibility, Horgas arranged an interview with Vasquez in prison, and he made sure that defense attorney McHugh was present as well. In this meeting, Horgas made an intriguing offer to Vasquez. He could potentially be released after a couple of years if he cooperated and revealed any information about an accomplice involved in the crimes. However, despite the tempting proposition, Vasquez remained steadfast in his claim of innocence and refused to provide any information about a possible co-conspirator. This left Horgas in a difficult position as he grappled with the idea that Vasquez might genuinely be innocent and there could be a dangerous serial killer still roaming free.
From the way he was talking and everything and answering my questions, I didn't think he knew a damn thing about Carolyn Hamm's murder.
The detectives knew they couldn't dismiss any leads, and their investigation took a new turn. Horgas and Carrig intensified their efforts to review and reevaluate the evidence from the previous crimes attributed to Vasquez. They sought any clues that might suggest the involvement of another person. As they meticulously combed through the case files, they discovered certain discrepancies and gaps that had been overlooked before. Horgas started considering the alternative scenario, that Vasquez had been wrongly convicted and the actual perpetrator of these heinous crimes had managed to evade capture and was possibly responsible for even more murders. The unsettling possibility of a serial killer on the loose haunted Horgas and Carrig as they redoubled their commitment to solving the case and ensuring that justice prevailed, whether it meant proving Vasquez's innocence or apprehending the true culprit. The race against time intensified as they worked tirelessly to follow every lead and uncover the truth hidden behind the layers of uncertainty and doubt. As Horgas delved into the investigation, he discovered other crimes with a similar pattern. Furthermore, Horgas learned that between late June 1983 and late January 1984, 10 women in Arlington and Alexandria had survived assault attempts by a masked black man of slender build, armed with a knife and carrying a nylon cord. In September 1987, a breakthrough in forensic technology known as DNA fingerprinting made headlines when it led to the arrest of Colin Pitchfork in England for the assaulted murder of 2 young girls. Detective Joe Horgas, intrigued by the potential of DNA to help solve the Virginia crimes, reached out to Life Codes, a New York laboratory known for DNA paternity testing. They confirmed that if there was enough DNA in the recovered bodily fluid, it could link a suspect to a crime. The challenge was obtaining the suspect's DNA. During the investigation, Horgas thought about the chance that the person who committed the crimes might have been in prison from late January 1984 to September 1987. This could be the reason why no crimes were reported during that time. While going through the crime records, he remembered a name from the past, Timothy Spencer. Horgas checked the records thoroughly and found out that Timothy had been arrested for a burglary in Alexandria on January 29, 1984. He was later released to a halfway house on September 4, 1987. Interestingly, Timothy was signed out of the halfway house during the same time when all the 1987 murders occurred. To be sure about Timothy's involvement, the officers asked Timothy to provide blood samples for DNA testing, which he willingly did. The DNA test results showed that his semen matched the DNA found at all the crime scenes. This provided strong evidence of his guilt. Another important aspect of the investigation was related to David Vasquez. In his case, DNA testing was done by 3 different laboratories. However, it was discovered that the DNA samples collected were actually from other crime scenes. However, the same testing methods were used, and it didn't match with Vasquez's. This meant that Vasquez was wrongly convicted for a murder he did not commit. These findings were crucial in solving the crimes and identifying the real perpetrator, Timothy Spencer. The use of DNA testing played a significant role in bringing justice and correcting the wrongful conviction of David Vasquez. The testing on the hair found in Vasquez's case yielded inconclusive results. However, the same testing in other cases led investigators to Timothy Spencer, who was later convicted and executed for 2 other assaults and murders. Despite compelling evidence pointing to Timothy Spencer's involvement in Carolyn Hamm's murder, the bodily fluid recovered from the crime scene did not contain enough DNA for testing, leaving a crucial gap in the case. Tragically, this meant that David Vasquez, an innocent man, had no legal recourse under Virginia law and was wrongfully imprisoned for Hamm's murder. As investigators continued, an FBI report revealed that the same individual responsible for the other murders, a person without mental impairment, had committed the crime in Vasquez's case as well. Recognizing the grave miscarriage of justice, both the prosecution and defense attorneys collaborated to secure a pardon for Vasquez. Finally, on January 4, 1989, Governor Gerald L. Baliles granted the pardon, officially acknowledging Vasquez's innocence and exonerating him from the wrongful conviction that had caused immense suffering. Though Vasquez was eventually released, the 1,796 days of wrongful incarceration inflicted immeasurable damage, forever altering the course of his life. In recognition of the grave injustice, the Virginia General Assembly passed a special compensatory legislation in 1990, awarding Vasquez $117,000 for the time he spent behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. Between the night of September 18, 1989, and the early morning of September 19th, a devastating event happened in Richmond. Debbie Dudley Davis, a vibrant and accomplished 35-year-old account executive, met a tragic and untimely end in her Westover Hills apartment. The Richmond police, responding to a distressing call, made the shocking discovery as they entered her residence. There, lying unclothed on the bed, was Debbie's lifeless body. She'd been strangled with something like a belt and a ratchet-type device. A few weeks later, on the night of October 2, 1987, or the early hours of October 3rd, another horrifying incident occurred in Richmond. Dr. Susan Helms, a promising and dedicated resident in neurosurgery at the esteemed Medical College of Virginia, was murdered in her West 31st Street home. The shocking discovery was made by her devastated husband when he returned to find her partially clothed body lying in the bedroom closet. The intruder responsible for this criminal act had gained access to the house by cutting out a large portion of a second-story bedroom window screen. After the autopsy, the medical examiner revealed that Susan's tragic death was caused by ligature strangulation inflicted by 2 belts found around her neck. But that was not all. On November 22, 1987, yet another devastating incident sent shockwaves through the community. Diane Cho, a bright and vibrant 15-year-old high school student, was discovered lifeless in her family's apartment on Gavilan Court in Chesterfield County near Richmond. The tragic discovery revealed a horrifying truth. She, too, had suffered a fate similar to the victims before her. Diane had been brutally assaulted and mercilessly strangled, leaving her loved one shattered and the entire community in disbelief and fear. The chilling nature of Diane's murder bore a haunting resemblance to the previous cases involving Debbie Dudley Davis and Dr. Susan Helms, who fell prey to the same unknown assailant just weeks earlier. Richmond police were grappling with a series of gruesome crimes that seemed connected with a common modus operandi: assault and ligature strangulation. The killer's ruthlessness and the manner in which he gained access to the victims' homes left the authorities searching for clues, desperate to bring him to justice. Despite efforts to apprehend the perpetrator, the person behind the gruesome killings and assaults remained unknown despite their merciless spree. However, the Southside Strangler was far from finished. The killer's final known victim was Susan Tucker, a 44-year-old woman living in a peaceful condominium in Arlington, Virginia. Her nightmare began on November 27, 1987.
Everything about her was very gentle. She was very soft-spoken. Just had this amazing softness about her, this human quality.
A rope cut from the Venetian blinds had been used to tie her arms and neck, indicating a violent struggle. There was also evidence of assault and strangulation. Her body wasn't discovered until December 1st, 1987. Upon discovery at her home, it was evident that she'd been deceased for several days.
Her hands were tied behind her back, and there was a rope going from her hands up to her neck. And these ropes were brand new, nice shiny white.
As the investigation unfolded, striking similarities emerged among the different crime scenes. Multiple stains from bodily fluids were found at each location, suggesting that the killer had engaged in disturbing behavior after committing the murders. The pattern of breaking into the homes through first-floor rear windows and ransacking the premises remained consistent across all cases. The savagery of Susan's injuries left no doubt among detectives that she'd fallen prey to the same cold-blooded killer dubbed the Southside Strangler by the press. The search for the Southside Strangler was difficult for the police because there were multiple copycats. Also, because of the severity of the crime, every time a body was discovered, people related it to the Southside Strangler. This trend worsened when two women, Rena Chaporis and Michael J. St. Hilaire, were found dead on the same day, January 16, 1988. Initially, there were suspicions that these deaths were connected to the serial killer's spree. However, further investigation revealed that Chaporis' death was the work of a copycat, as she'd not been assaulted like the previous victims. Additionally, St. Hilaire's death was ruled to be by her own hand, unrelated to the Southside Strangler's crimes. The sudden twist in the cases added complexity to the ongoing hunt for the elusive serial killer. The community was paralyzed by fear, and whispers and theories about the serial killers spread like wildfire. No one felt safe as they grappled with the terrifying thought that this ruthless murderer could be lurking just around the corner. The authorities worked tirelessly, trying to piece together the puzzle that could lead them to the Southside Strangler. They were determined to put an end to the reign of terror that had gripped the area. To achieve this, they intensified their investigation, and the race to apprehend the killer terrorizing the community gained momentum. On January 20th, 1988, the long-awaited break in the chilling case of the Southside Strangler finally came when Timothy Watson Spencer, a 25-year-old resident of Richmond, was apprehended by Arlington County Police. His arrest was linked to the brutal assault and murder of Susan Tucker in her Arlington home. The detectives connected the dots, revealing that Timothy had traveled from Richmond to Arlington during the time of Tucker's death as he intended to spend Thanksgiving with his mother, who coincidentally lived merely a mile away from Tucker's residence. The evidence against Timothy grew stronger as he was charged not only with Tucker's murder, but also with the killings of Debbie Davis, Susan Helms, and Diane Cho. During the time of the Richmond murders, Timothy had been living at a halfway house for parolees in South Richmond, conveniently located within walking distance of both Davis's and Helms' homes. Although Timothy's killing spree seemingly began in 1987, detectives were puzzled by one similar case in 1984. Even though a suspect had been convicted and the case was deemed closed, it bore a striking resemblance to Southside Strangler's method of killing. The 1984 murder happened in Arlington, Virginia. It all started when Carolyn Ham didn't show up for work for 2 consecutive days. Her concerned secretary reached out to Darla Henry, Ham's closest friend. Henry decided to visit Ham's home to check on her well-being. Upon arriving, they noticed the front door was partially open. Seeking assistance, they met Larry Rancer, a young man backing his car out of a nearby driveway. Together, they entered the house and tragically discovered Ham's lifeless body. The crime scene was terrifying. The victim's lifeless body was nude, a piece of cord was cut from the Venetian blinds, and a knife was left on the floor. The victim, 32-year-old Carolyn Ham, was a Washington lawyer living alone in a neighborhood where murder was uncommon, but she became the center of attention when the crime occurred. Police reports confirmed that she was tied up and hanged at the entry to her garage. The authorities swiftly made an arrest, obtained a confession, and secured a conviction in the case. The high-profile nature of the incident drew significant public interest and brought the issue of safety and crime to the forefront of discussions. Several witnesses had identified David Vasquez, the man who was sentenced to prison for the murder, and circumstantial evidence pointed to him. Yet, investigators couldn't brush off the nagging suspicion that Timothy was involved in this case, even though there was no evidence linking him to it. Timothy Wilson Spencer was born on March 17, 1962, in Green Valley, Virginia. He grew up with his brother Travis Spencer. The two siblings shared a strong bond that persisted for years. Timothy was the responsible big brother and took care of Travis. However, Timothy soon began a life of crime. He became involved in burglary and other minor crimes, leading to his arrest in 1984. However, because of the non-violent nature of the crime, he was released shortly afterwards. In turn, Travis looked up to his big brother, Timothy, and hoped to be like him. However, that wasn't to be, as everything changed in late 1987. After his arrest, Timothy Wilson Spencer faced trial in Arlington, Virginia on July 11, 1988, for the brutal assault, burglary, and murder of Susan Tucker. Represented by attorneys Carl Womack and Thomas Kelly, Thomas was found guilty and received a death sentence. The groundbreaking trial showcased the use of DNA evidence, a first in Virginia, which conclusively linked him to the crime scene, leaving no doubt about his guilt. Timothy also faced another trial, this time in Richmond, for the brutal assault, burglary, and murder of Debbie Davis. DNA evidence, including bodily fluids and hairs collected from the scene of the crime, was identified as a match to Timothy's DNA. Forensic experts presented compelling evidence, revealing that the likelihood of the DNA belonging to anyone other than Timothy was a staggering 1 in 705 million. On September 22, 1988, he was found guilty of assault, burglary, and capital murder of Debbie Davis, securing another conviction. On January 17, 1989, Timothy Wilson Spencer faced yet another trial, this time in Richmond for the assault, burglary, and murder of Susan Helms. Once again, he was found guilty and sentenced to death, with the crucial DNA evidence tying him to the crime scene playing a significant role in the prosecution's case. With the successful convictions for the murders of Susan Tucker, Debbie Davis, and Susan Helms,
so we had 3 cases with DNA evidence. Forget about who it was. We knew who it was. It was then, how do we convince the jury?
investigators expanded their investigation, comparing Timothy's DNA with samples collected from other crime scenes. This meticulous examination led to a startling revelation. The DNA evidence pointed to Timothy as the likely culprit in the 1984 murder of Carolyn Ham, a crime for which David Vasquez had been convicted. Despite investigators' strong beliefs about his involvement, Timothy Wilson Spencer was never charged or convicted for Carolyn Ham's murder, leaving a lingering sense of uncertainty surrounding the case. In the murder of Diane Cho, the DNA evidence was inconclusive, but Timothy still faced trial and was ultimately found guilty. Timothy's appeals to overturn his convictions for the murders of Susan Tucker, Debbie Davis, and Susan Helms were all denied. The United States Court of Appeals upheld the validity of the new DNA technology used to secure Timothy's convictions, confirming the strength of the evidence against him. A series of last-minute legal efforts, including a plea for DNA retesting, were also rejected by the U.S. Supreme Court. On April 27, 1994, at Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia, Timothy Wilson Spencer met his end in Old Sparky, the Virginia prison electric chair. His execution took place at 11:13 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and he chose not to make a final statement before facing the consequences of his heinous actions.
Death was pronounced by the attending physician at 11:13 p.m. There were no complications. Mr. Spencer did not make a last statement. Thank you.
His execution marked the first capital punishment conviction in the United States based on DNA testing. Outside the prison, emotions ran high, with a crowd of about 100 people gathered. Half were death penalty opponents holding a candlelight prayer vigil, while the rest were mostly local high school students boisterously cheering for Timothy's death. Vasquez's conviction led Virginia to establish the first state DNA laboratory. U.S. Attorney Helen F. Fahey praised the groundbreaking nature of the case, with far-reaching consequences beyond this individual trial. Timothy's trial marked a turning point for DNA evidence in criminal cases, demonstrating its potential and leading to wider acceptance in the justice system. The landmark case shed light on the importance of DNA testing and inspired Patricia D. Cromwell's novel Postmortem. Successful conviction for Timothy's 1987 rampage raised awareness about the crucial role of DNA technology in future criminal investigations, setting a precedent for its use in legal proceedings. On January 26, 2020, Travis, the younger brother of Timothy Wilson Spencer, bravely opened up about his brother's heinous crimes on the show Evil Lives Here in the episode titled My Brother Made History. Travis shared his perspective on the chilling events that forever changed the lives of the victims and their families.
That was the hardest part of the whole situation. Like I said, you told me something about some stealing, but murder, I never could see my brother actually murdering.
Additionally, Travis also gave an interview for the British television program Born to Kill, which dedicated an episode to delve into the details of Timothy Wilson Spencer's crimes. Through his interviews, Travis shed light on the unsettling truth about his brother's actions, giving viewers a deeper understanding of the impact of such evil deeds on the lives of those affected.
I think something wasn't really right in the mind. If somebody's ill, that's treatment. That needs to be with medication, some doctoring. Me growing up in that household, he was definitely ill.
Timothy Spencer's story underscores the importance of analyzing each piece of evidence in a case before reaching a conclusion. It also highlights the importance of DNA testing in determining the truth of an incident. However, most importantly, it highlights certain concerns about how devastating and far-reaching the impact of a wrongful conviction can be to society.